it, you are authorized to fire at will.
Hey everybody, thanks for stopping by. It is Minnesota Black Robe Regiment's 4-year extravaganza. I don't know how to say it other than to say thanks for the 4 years. As we get the show going, I'm going to be bringing my friend Kevin on to take part in the conversation, and uh, we're going to be breaking down a podcast, an episode of a podcast, not the whole thing. It's over an hour and it's almost 2 hours long. From Voice of Reason Radio. It's a Christian podcast, part of the Christian Podcast Network. It's from a group of people that I would consider friends, brothers, allies um, in the Christian realm, and that's why I'm saying we're going to get back to our roots. But what I'm going to do here, real quick, is I'm going to bring Kevin in so he can say hi and we can get him introduced. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, how you doing, TC?
I'm doing good. It's funny, guys. Kevin always calls me Todd, and so he always keeps in mind when he comes on the show to call me TC because most of you know me as TC. So someday you shall all aspire to be Kevin and have permission to call me Todd. So I've kind of grown accustomed to being called TC now. So it's funny when somebody in public recognizes me and they say TC, and someone who's with me who calls me Todd all the time is like, "Who's TC?" But I want to give you guys a taste of where we're going with the beginning of the show tonight. And if you are watching, please like, comment, share. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And keep in mind, if you super chat your comment, you might be lucky enough on the 4-year anniversary of Minnesota Black Robe Regiment podcast to get your comment right on air. That's how magnanimous I'm feeling in celebration of where I started and where I've come from. So, yes, super chat away, and more than anything, please, for real, like, comment, and share. But we're going to watch opening video, folks, if you will. Here we go. Maybe, if it will cooperate. So, Kevin, you've listened to the show, and so I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with that clip, that 2+ minute clip that I shared. Um, we will be getting to some of the comments. We're going to start early on. We're not going to listen to the whole thing. I've got some key areas picked out. Kevin, you have my full um, permission, my full um, uh, affirmation to stop me commenting or even stop something as we're listening to it and to share your perspective. As I told you before, one of the reasons I brought you on is you are measured, you are kind, not to a fault, but you are kind to the core, and you tend. We've both talked about this. We balance each other out very well.
Hmm.
Um, if we go back to our days of street ministry, and even interactions online, we have um, we have compelled one another and sometimes cajoled one another to be different, be better, um, in different ways. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on with for this. And we share a theological, philosophical perspective that is probably about as close as I can get to anyone else that I know.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to bring you on. You were with me at the beginning of this show. I shared the video with you. I think it was you and Jake Wiskershin earlier today. Another good, become a good friend to you, I know as well. And um, I shared my very first man on the street interview with Christina from Savage, Minnesota, talking about her salon that she was going to lose. She was on like 6 weeks in, really 4, 5, 6 weeks into the shutdown during 2020, and she was on the verge of losing her business that she had barely had open for 2 years. And you've walked through everything over the last 4 years with me. You know where I started, where I came from. You've seen me at the heights of decent reasoning, and you've seen me in some of my ugly moments. So, um, just since we're sitting here and this is a 4 year extravaganza, as we're getting ready
Hmm.
to watch or listen in to uh, the segments of the podcast from Voice of Reason, uh, what have you? What have you seen over the last 4 years besides me becoming maybe a little bit more radicalized than than some would like?
Yeah.
It, whatever it is, it's fine. You say it. I won't cry on air. I promise.
Yeah. No, it's fine. I want to make sure. First of all, I'm not sure if my internet is a little spotty, but um, you're breaking up a little bit for me. It could be me. The wind is blowing pretty heavy here in New Mexico, which is where I am, and so that's possible. So if the listeners or whatever, if I'm breaking up, please let me know. We can always try resetting my internet connection or something like that. But to answer your question, first of all, I'm proud of you, brother. You've brought this show a long way in the 4 years. You've continued to mature as a man and as a brother, I think, and in so many different ways, unique ways from me. Um, we've done Christian ministry together on the street, so I feel like I know you really well, and I know you know me really well. We've walked through dark hours with one another, which is how bonds are always created and formulated and really solidified. So I'm always grateful for you and who you are and where we've come together. So the show has progressed and you've taken a little different spin from where you originally were with just primarily Christian evangelism ministry into more of a political realm, but I think also a political realm that is a good political realm. I mean, the whole name of the show, Black Robe Regiment, has deep historic roots rooted in Christianity. What Puritan era, New American colonial Puritan era Christianity. So, these are
Indeed.
these are good, solid things, and I mean, we can't make government or rebellion against government idolatrous, but yet we should be able to voice a good Christian worldview against what we see as tyrannical in the government. And oh my goodness, if we don't see tyranny in the government right now, you're not looking very hard. So,
Yes.
um,
I'm glad that you said that, because one of the viewers tonight, I know for a fact, well, actually, two of them, if Angry Vet is still here. No, folks, that's not a sock puppet account. I'm not the Angry Vet. There, yeah, Angry Vet's another Kevin, by the way. But Angry Vet is here, and Bailey from Marion, Iowa. So she's from, well, not from your neck of the woods, but she's
yep,
from Iowa. Kevin, when you and I met, you were down in the Quad Cities,
yep,
and we
yep,
we did a lot of stuff in Iowa City, and you even came to Cedar Falls for something with me, and
yeah.
so um, I do know for a fact that at least two, if not more, of the people who are watching live and others would say yes, tyranny is certainly a problem. Bailey says, "Congrats on 4 years." Thank you, Bailey. Bailey and I met on April 1st. I don't. I think she's real. I don't think she was an April Fool's joke. I texted with her today. We're working on a story for Bailey down in Marion, but uh, Bailey's got a channel and she's exposing corruption in Marion, and the stuff that she's telling me about what's going on in Marion reminds me of Aransas Pass, Texas. Things that we've heard um, going on down in Aransas Pass, and if you're not familiar, I'll try and put the links to the gentleman that's exposing stuff in Aransas Pass. But I mean, even Kevin, when you think about it, you look at and this is going to be my segue into the content of the podcast. You look at what Governor Greg Abbott, right? Because we think when most people in binary black and white thinking think uh, left wing progressive Democrats are tyrannical. They want to censor you. They want to shut you down. They want to silence you. Republicans, and there again, not normie con types. Everybody knows how I feel about that. Normie con types think, oh, Republicans are pro liberty, they're constitutionalists and whatnot. But when we look yesterday at Texas, Governor Greg Abbott sent in law enforcement, and this is why this is so important, sent law enforcement in and ordered them to arrest protesters at the University of Texas in Austin. Now, people are saying, well, that's fine because they were disruptive. They were blocking access to buildings. Now, there's some dispute as to whether or not that was happening. But what Governor Abbott said on his Twitter account when this was taking place, that's not what he said. He did not say, I'm shutting this down because of that. What he said on his Twitter account, and I'll try and read it directly here. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Here it is. And I quote, arrests being made right now and will continue until crowd disperses. These protesters belong in jail. Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas, period. Students joining in hate-filled anti-Semitic protest at any public college or university in Texas should be expelled. Now, on the face of that, Kevin, in our hearts, so to speak, maybe, and I don't even want to say hearts because you and I definitely have a different perspective on the heart. We know that the heart isn't what the Western world normally thinks of as the heart. We know that Christian philosophy, Judeo-Christian philosophy, the heart is actually the combination of intellect, reason, and emotion.
Yeah.
So in the emotional side of us, we're going, well, gosh, they shouldn't be doing that. They should be shut down. But when you actually bring Christian reasoning, Christian thought, the idea of natural rights into this, everything that Governor Abbott ultimately said, and correct me if I'm wrong, really, he wasn't talking about people doing violence. He was talking about using violence on people for expressing their views, popular or unpopular.
Sure.
Did you
Yeah.
hear those comments that same way?
Yeah, that's great. The whole time you were reading that, I'm kind of thinking back to the 60s, Kent State and these sorts of things, which, then more liberal minded people, hippies of the day, were protesting the Vietnam War and, these kinds of things. And so it's interesting how these things kind of come back around and, they take on different forms and that kind of stuff. But, I am certainly for peaceful protesting on no matter what side of the coin you might land on, whether it be to just make blanket statements, liberal, conservative, whatever, we have to have the right to be able to do those sorts of things to protest peacefully. I don't think you can burn buildings and kill people and trample people and that kind of stuff. But, peaceful protesting, isn't that what we're founded on?
Well, and even understanding that when tyranny does raise its ugly head,
Mm-hmm.
the natural rights of man, whether you're an atheist and you believe that our rights arise from some amorphous, abstract concept, or you're a Christian or some other religious perspective, our natural rights are ours, and they're inalienable, unalienable. People will say that different ways, but they cannot be stripped from us. And when the state, and Kevin, you've heard me use this phrase before, I definitely draw a difference between government and state. When the state
Mm-hmm.
steps in and determines what can and cannot be said, they're really getting ready to strip from you all of your other natural rights.
Yeah.
Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom of association. And so there does come a place, which is like, you referenced the Black Robe Regiment in the early days of the colonies. And as the Christian pastors preached against the tyranny of King George, the tyranny of Great Britain, inspired their men, especially, to rise up against that tyranny and to bring force to bear, not out of malice for other people, but out of a malice for tyranny that they preach directly from the Bible. And we aren't really familiar with that today. You will not hear Christian preachers
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. And I think this is part of that really good, like I said, segue into the show that we're going to be reviewing. And so I'm going to skip forward. So the show is Voice of Reason Radio, and it's hosted by a man named Chris and a man named Richard. I won't go into their last names. And I would consider them both philosophically, Christian philosophy wise. Kevin and I would probably find ourselves, for the most part, predominantly in the same camp as these individuals. And at the beginning of the show, and the link is in the description of the video, folks, if you want to listen to the whole thing to make sure that we're not taking anything out of context, I would definitely encourage you to do so. And correct me if I say anything you think is out of line, but I would also encourage you then to reach out to the host of the show and say, hey, what do you mean by this? How do you develop this viewpoint? And engage with them in legitimate conversation. But don't just go at them with insults, please, because you guys know that, I take a dim view with just being insulting for the sake of being insulting. Engage in conversation. But they kind of lay the groundwork for Chris retiring from the law enforcement career field in his state of Nevada. And he starts to talk a little bit about his experiences and the experiences of law enforcement as a whole. And we're going to pick up at right about the 27-minute mark, where Chris starts to talk about what those experiences will do for two people in law enforcement. So here we go. And then just let me know if you can hear this, Kevin.
So you have this darkness that you have to be in constant exposure to, and you have very little place that you can go to have an outlet for it, because everything you deal with, it's protected information. You can't share this information with people. You come home, you can't talk. A man works at a computer factory building computers, or works at a widget factory building widgets, can talk about his day. You come home from that environment, there's so very little you can share. You can say some things, but not all. And so it's very difficult. And so you carry that weight with you. And what happens is, over time, how you perceive the world begins to change. Now, I'm not saying that every law enforcement officer is this weird ticking time bomb that, their thinking is cracked and warped. It's just that how you view life and how you have to deal with it is forcefully changed because of what you're exposed to, and how and where you can have an outlet for it. And there were times that I couldn't understand it. Life was going generally okay, but I would have like periods of deep depression. Couldn't figure out why. I couldn't point to something and say, it's not like, to quote a comedian, a Christian comedian, Jeff Allen, who says, when he was going through stuff, he said, if I woke up every day and a man was beating me with a stick and somebody asked me why I was so miserable, I could say it's because he keeps hitting me with a stick. Then there was something I could identify. He says, but the stuff he was dealing with, he couldn't identify. It was the same thing for me. I couldn't point to something and say, this is why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. And I began to realize what it was I didn't process life the way everybody else did. So even as a Christian, and going to the Word of God and of life minister to me, which I believe is what carried me through so much of this.
I think, Kevin, I think you and I have enough there in context with what's being said there to really kind of interact. And folks, once again, for you're watching, thank you so much. For everybody who's saying congratulations, thank you so much for that. If you really want to do me a solid on the 4-year anniversary, share this out. Make sure your friends are watching. Make sure they watch it in the replay, and make sure that they comment and that they subscribe to the channel. That's the biggest thing you can do for me right now. I'm trying to grow the brand, folks. No apologies. I am trying to grow the brand. Kevin, as you're listening to this, there would have been a day where you would have kind of heard what Chris was saying and said, and there again, correct me if I'm wrong, you would have said, well, hey, that's just, you're not spending enough time in the Word of God. The answer to this problem is the Word of God. Do you hear that reflected in what Chris is saying there about his experience and the experience of other law enforcement?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know very well about me and kind of being caught up in a fundamentalist movement. And, I think you mentioned just a little earlier in the program, something about things being black and white. And in fundamentalism, things are very black and white. And, so there's not a category, there's not really a place for gray areas, a lot of gray areas anyway. And certainly in this gentleman's field, we're really talking about a mental health issue, right? I mean, he's struggling in ways that what he is claiming, and I believe he's probably accurate, is that a law enforcement officer is going to struggle in ways that the average citizen can't imagine. And I have no doubts that is accurate to some degree, at a lot of degree, probably.
Right. And he even makes the comment too that, that doesn't mean all officers are ticking time bombs. The problem that I have here is this Christianese, this response to it of, if it wasn't for the Word of God, and that sounds so antithetical to who people who have known me for more than 4 years. They're like, well, that's so antithetical to who you are. But it's because of this false narrative that the Word of God, which everything, in Christian theology, Christian philosophy, the Word of God is truth. And everything that it contains truth within Christianity. Whether you're a Christian or not, that's the way it is. It does contain, the Christians have to view it that way. But it doesn't contain all truth.
Right.
and it doesn't contain an answer to every single problem and every single situation that you're going to experience. And so right out of the gate, in Chris's, what ends up becoming a diatribe or a screed as this goes on is an over reliance on Christian theology to fix all problems.
Yeah.
And I mean, we could do that with any religion. If you're a Buddhist, if everybody would just embrace Buddhism, the world would be a better place. There's no, I mean, can we dispute that? If everybody embraced Buddhism, everything would be better for everyone. It just would. Like, but that's where conflict comes in. Like, if everybody would just embrace Islam or a particular sect of Islam, then everybody would get along and there would be no problems because everybody would be on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a Christian or not, you just have to recognize that the Christian mindset really does, if you're not careful, will say, if you just did things my way, everything would be fine. And what it does is it relies on this Christian counseling motif of you just need to recognize that your problems you're having, the struggles that you're having are all due to your sin, and you just need to do better, sin less, and you'll have less problems. And if you're not sinning less, then you're going to have these deep, dark depressions, or you're going to, I don't know how you get around it. Like there's something about that. If you're going to embrace this, what they call Christian nouthetic counseling, something is wrong with Chris if he's having these problems. There's a sin issue there.
Yeah.
And I and Kevin, where we're at now, and especially I know Kevin has come to this much more recently even than I, but sometimes just maybe Christians, especially Christian cops or cops in general, you need therapy. You might need to get a therapist. You just might need a therapist because honestly, you see a lot of crap and you deal with crappy people. And not everybody you deal with is crappy, but the crappy people you deal with make you really kind of go, is there any light left in the world? Like it's
Right.
just the way it is. And so my heart actually kind of breaks for Chris here. I'm saying maybe if you would have got some real help, you wouldn't have had those moments.
That I agree with you on that statement. And, that's one of the kind of ongoing discussions you and I have with Jake, who you mentioned earlier. And, I don't know how to say this. So a guy reached out to me on Facebook. He's a Christian. He's a pastor. He saw some stuff that I was saying maybe about mental illness or something. And I sent you this message, and I think he thought that I was going to be an ally on his point of view regarding Christian counseling and that kind of stuff. And I wrote him back, and I appreciated the offer to be in this group that he was in. And I said, I'm afraid I'm going to be a fly in your ointment because I don't think I see things the same way you do. And, God has gifted people in different ways to have different interests and different desires. And for some people, for men like Jake, their desire is to understand the brain, right? And, psychology in many Christian circles, especially those that lean very conservative or toward the fundamentalist side, this is almost like, it's a voodoo science. It's a swear word. It's, it's all this kind of stuff. And, the guy really didn't respond to me. And then I told him I was writing an article on mental health in the church, and he said, I'll be interested to read it. And again, he never really got back with me after I wrote the article and posted it, because I think he probably thinks I'm wrong, which is fine. I don't have to convince anybody. I don't really care. These are the conclusions I have drawn based on where I've come from, what I've learned, the books I've read, the people I have meaningful conversations with, and the things that I've experienced first and foremost, So, therapy and counseling and psychologists and psychiatrists, I'm not saying they're all equal, right? There's good and bad in every field, which I know we're going to get into a little bit here regarding
Right.
the field that we're talking about. So there's good psychologists, there's good psychiatrists, and there's bad ones. And the thing that I've said is if I'm a Christian and I'm going to seek therapy in this regard, whether they're a Christian counselor, therapist, or whatever or not, doesn't matter to me so much that they're not hostile to Christianity. Right? So if I go to a therapist that thinks Christianity is stupid and I'm an idiot for being a Christian, probably not going to be able to relate to me. But
Gee, why
we
would
can
you say that, Kevin?
say, yeah. So anyway, I'm rambling. So, but I thought that was important to mention. You know.
Well, and there again, like one of the things that I want people. Oh, wow! One of the things I got to get to this. One of the things I want people to understand is the big issue, the big concern for cops is all of them early on need therapy. They all need therapy. When I went into the law enforcement career field, I had to take a psych evaluation. I had to take a long written test, the Minnesota multiphasic test, which is really just a long psych eval. But even after that, I had to go and get an assessment by a psychiatrist, and he told me, "You passed this, flying colors, no problem. You're never going to pass it again." By the way, that was before I ever actually started on the job, like started doing the job. I was still in the academy phase. He goes, "You passed it, but you're never going to pass it again." And that kind of mindset permeates law enforcement. Christian, non-Christian, Buddhist cops, non-Buddhist cops, Muslim cops, whatever. That that mindset permeates law enforcement, and it causes so many problems. It's a massive amount of problems because now cops, one, don't want to take it because they're afraid they're going to lose their jobs, and two, they devolve. They devolve into darkness. So even if they weren't struggling with that stuff before, they're going to struggle with it after. Folks, we have a superstar in the auditing community is watching. Bo from Flex Your Freedom says, "Thanks for having me back while I was locked up. Got to go edit a video, but I shared this on my community tab. Thank you. If you read this part, you are a nerd." And I am a nerd, Bo. I read that intentionally because I am a nerd. So, Bo, thanks for stopping by and sharing that. If you guys don't know Bo's story, go over to Flex Your Freedom, subscribe to his channel. Not that he needs me to tell people to subscribe. He's got thousands and thousands of people watching him all the time. But his story is an perfect example of why we're having this conversation tonight. So I want to touch on one thing real quick here, and it won't take but a few seconds to listen to. So here we go.
Why? But I couldn't. It didn't seem like that one thing should have been it. You know, maybe my finances weren't super fantastic, but we're paying our bills. Why am I in this funk? And it's because I didn't process life the way everybody else did. And that was kind of a seminal moment for me where I began to recognize I looked at life differently. And because of that, how I dealt with it was hard. And so coming out of that and recognizing I don't have to live like that anymore. I don't, one of the things that was so weird to me was when, as November 4th was coming up, I had announced my retirement. I filed my paperwork. I had my separation date. All of it was there. But until November 3rd, I was still a law enforcement officer. November 4th, I was a civilian again. And it was that moment where I began.
Now, this is probably going to sound nitpicky to some people, but I want to point this out. And Kevin, you and I didn't really discuss this point that much. Just so everybody knows, I listened to this podcast over and over and over again because I wanted to make sure I was processing it correctly. Cops are civilians, folks. I'm not nitpicking here. This is a reality. Law enforcement, cops, sheriff's deputies, whatever, marshals, whoever they are civilians. There is no distinction between a cop and a non-cop. They are civilians. Military personnel are not civilians, and there's a very clear distinction. And the reason that this mentality arises in law enforcement, the reason they say, well, when I went out and became a civilian again, or when I went out and got a different job and I was a civilian, or when I retired, I became a civilian. The reason this this mindset exists is because police have been militarized. Their rank structure is based on military rank structures and has been for years, but it has been heavily increasing in that mindset, the militarization mindset, ever since um, really the early 70s, late 60s, under Daryl Gates from Los Angeles, when he created the very first SWAT team. And they had to come up with a way to make it feel military, because what they were doing was really military-based operations.
Yeah.
And that has now permeated into all law enforcement, from the beat cop to commanders. And there again, with the rank structure, they see themselves as a separate part of society. They see themselves as separate from civilian society. And they need to be reminded that they are civilians. But here you hear Chris talk about when I finally became a civilian again. No, you've always been a civilian, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of cops struggle, is they don't see themselves as that way. Kevin, any thoughts on that? Do you think I'm being pedantic, or?
Oh no, I think you're right. You just even look at the uniforms that they wear, and I mean they're military style. They've got the vests on and the helmets sometime, and those be more specialized units. Maybe a gang unit or a SWAT unit or something like that. But yeah, they're definitely taking a more military look to them. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So the next section we're going to play, I'll let the comments speak for themselves.
From my living room, I'm at home. It's the weekend. It's my day off. And now I'm having to deal with some wayward, probationer or parolee, I can't remember which, who has failed to notify us of a change in his schedule. And I'm leaving him a message in my cop voice, making sure he has very clear instructions, because he is very possibly going to go to jail if he doesn't get back in touch with me. I get off the phone, and as I turn around, my oldest son has gone almost pale. And he's all, I think I just soiled myself. I'm not kidding. That was his words. What I always strove to not do, if I could avoid it, was not bring the cop side of me home. Not easy to do. I tried to be a loving husband and father, and tried to leave those things behind at the office if I could. So they had not heard Dad go cop mode.
That part of the conversation is really taking place in the realm of how do I want to say this? And Kevin, you listened to it too, so obviously, please, give me some feedback if you think it needs to be done. It's taking place in this commentary about always being on duty all the time, and then also having to take on call slots, and that's a little bit of what he was talking about. But the reason that stood out to me, is and Kevin, if you saw it the same way or didn't, that's fine, is kind of the lighthearted, jovial response that he had to his son's response to hearing him in cop mode. And I don't know, what do you think of that, Kevin? Do you hey everybody, Flex wants to know who's lurking in chat, and I agree. We need everybody to check in while Kevin's giving his thoughts here. What's your response to that cop mode versus dad mode? And do you think that would permeate how you interact with people in your role as an officer?
I don't know. I can't put myself in this fella's shoes. I don't know him. And I don't know what it's like to be in law enforcement. My dad was a cop for the younger part of my life. I've got an uncle that was a cop. We've got law enforcement in our family, but that doesn't.
You sound like every episode. You sound like every opening episode comment of Cops. My dad was a cop. My uncle was a cop. My brother was a cop. My dad's dad was a cop. So I had to be a cop.
I mean, isn't that true? I mean, and I did go to school for criminal justice and then dropped out. So I was planning to be a cop. It just never quite panned out. But I don't know. I mean, every man that I know of carries burdens with them, no matter what they're in. Um, you always, and there are times when your burdens are heavier than others. I mean, and in the times that I have conflict with my wife is typically when I I'm in a heavy mindset, if you want to call it that, like where you're carrying a lot of weight. And what do men do? Women talk. Rah, 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 rah. Men,
Right.
they shut down. They go to their cave, if you want to refer back to the old, men are from Mars, women are from Venus routine. Men go to their cave. They pull back from things. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's probably different from them, and I don't, you've.
I saw it in myself. I saw that I did have a different way of talking to people in my role
Mhm.
as a deputy. And there again, uh, I worked inside of a detention center, and so the vast majority of my experience with working with people who were involved in the criminal justice system were obviously people who were arrested, which actually helped me to see a lot of things a lot differently um,
Mhm.
than than I would have probably seen them without the experience. I did see it, but I struggle with the idea of it being laughable that your oldest child would have that response.
Yeah.
And you look back on it in hindsight after making the comments about how you had these moments of deep dark depression, and you began to see the world in a different light, and now you're laughing about uh, how he responded to seeing you in that mode. And what's that say about what your mode was like when you were addressing people who ultimately you were hired to serve and help? I know it's cliched, um, but that's to me like I said, that just it struck me as an odd response to that
Mhm.
response. So
Yeah.
I and
Yeah. I mean, personally, I don't think you're being critical of the guy too much anyway, but, everybody has a work mode, right? I mean, no matter what you do, you have a work mode versus a normal mode, and probably a little different for law enforcement than it is for the average person, non-law enforcement, not civilian, non-law enforcement. um, when you go through that stuff, I mean, I think about back to some of the stories my dad told me about, seeing things that were pretty horrendous. And, those are hard things to cope with. I mean, you can't, I think about, David, King David from, the Old Testament, and, how many people he killed. And how do you maintain a normal mindset when you're seeing this sort of violence and this sort of thing all the time? I think it's really hard. I think I mentioned to you and Jake, I've been watching this podcast, and he primarily deals with a lot of military people, and he's a military retired and CIA guy, and saw a lot of that kind of stuff. And every one of these military guys he has on that were involved in actual military conflicts and battles, they have serious mental issues,
yep.
post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, and one of the things he promotes is psychedelic therapy. And I even asked you and Jake about it. And I'm not promoting
Yes.
psychedelics on this
He's
program
not
or in any way.
he's also not promoting them. So
No, I'm not promoting it. I even asked the question. I mean, as a
right.
Christian, could I possibly ever get behind something like this? And it's kind of a struggle for me. I'm not trying to make a point about psychedelics. I'm trying to say that when you experience intense trauma, it messes up your brain,
Right.
right?
And I think we have, Bo there again from Flex Your Freedoms in here, combat vet. I think, Bo, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was at least 2 tours in Afghanistan. And
Mhm.
the experience that got him incarcerated for 10 days in Black Hawk County was his interaction with another military veteran.
Mm.
And I'll tell you, when I was watching the video that Bo put up, that Flex put up, I saw in the eyes of the officer that he was the one who ultimately ended up arresting him. He was, excuse the terminology, the guy was triggered.
Mhm.
He was triggered. And what he ended up doing was allowing whatever that had damaged him, that had caused him some sort of psychic trauma, psychological trauma. He allowed that triggering of Bo saying no to him and
Mm.
ultimately saying, "You're a tyrant," push him to a breaking point where he was going to exact vengeance on Flex, where maybe 20, 25 years prior to that, he would have just blown it off, or, 10, 15 years, however long he's been in, or not in, but working in law enforcement, he might have blown it off.
Mhm.
And it, that comes from a place of psychological damage. That's what
Yeah.
it is. Whether you're
Yeah.
prone to being a tyrant or being corrupt generally, there's damage that's being done. And when you're granted that kind of power, when you begin to take on damage, you get broken and you're not getting the help that you need. And these people need help,
Right.
but they're told not to get help because it could cost them their job, or they've got Christians in their circles are telling them that psychological problems are just sin issues, so you just need to fix that. They're just not going to get the help they need, and it's going to continue to cause them a massive amount of problems.
Well,
And
why can't we identify this and accept it for what it is?
yes,
We've my story very well, and you know that we were in what I would deem an authoritarian and an abusive church. So we have suffered abuse, spiritual, psychological abuse on a number of levels. Myself, my wife, 2 of my older daughters, and that sometimes needs help. You need help to deal with that. Now, if I broke my leg, that would be a pretty obvious outward sign, and I'd probably have to go to an emergency room and have the bones set and all that stuff, because it's inside my head or it's inside my spirit, what you
whatever the
described
case
as your
might be. Yeah,
heart. um, you can't just slap a band-aid on that, right? It has to
right,
be drawn out. You have to kind of deal with these experiences, and you have to have somebody that is skilled in knowing how to draw things out and to help you heal from
exactly.
that. If a child is molested sexually, do you think they just grow out of that?
Well, but you know what? That's a great point to make. These people see things. Some of them see crappy things. Some of them do crappy things, and I believe there's a cognitive dissonance aspect of, oh, I took an oath to the Constitution. I'm a liberty. I'm here to fight for liberty, and then they go out and they do things like arrest Flex, who's practicing his natural rights, and so there's a cognitive dissonance that causes a break in these guys, and sometimes it happens early on, and instead of going, I can't do this job anymore, they stay in it and they allow that cognitive dissonance to keep happening, and they just keep fracturing and fracturing and fracturing and fracturing and fracturing. And instead of getting help, or anybody in the agency giving a damn enough about them to get them help, they just let
Yeah.
them go. And that's how we end up with these tiny little petty tyrants out on the streets doing the things that they do, because they're broken. They're just broken, and they're not getting, and some of them just like the power. I mean, I've seen it personally. I've
Mhm.
experienced both on the job and seen people do it. And I've seen and I've been on the receiving end of it on numerous occasions, sadly now in the last few years. So we're gonna go to the next mark here, and this part of the conversation is really important because it's what I think is where you start to hear blurring the line in what is law and what is not law. And I think it's a very important position for people who call themselves Christian and they're in law enforcement to really start to understand.
And evil is the individual I was dealing with. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't still deal with still have the perspective of I'm the cop, you're the bad guy, but it very much tempered that because I realized the difference between their sins and mine is mine weren't illegal in terms of a temporal sense. And that in the eyes of God, we both needed Christ.
Well, I have quite a bit of law enforcement in my family and in my wife's family. And some are Christian, some are not, some are retired, some are not. But I can see without being truly saved in Christ, how easy it is for someone in that career field to end up being an alcoholic or divorced or some of these other negative.
And the reason that I played that part, and Kevin, I think you're going to recognize it, is what I think is a very common problem for Christians in general, but I think it's got to be a compounding problem for people who call themselves Christians in law enforcement. And that's a differentiation between what Christians call God's law or the law of God and man's law. And the problem for most conservatives especially, but you add the Christian moniker to the term conservative, and we know that the vast majority of conservatives consider themselves back the blue at all costs, is if it's a law on the books, it's a law. And in their minds, that's tantamount to being God's law because they have this understanding of passages like Romans 13, which say that we're to honor and obey the government. And they ignore the part that says that the government is supposed to be there to punish the evildoers, the wicked, and to reward what is good. And so Christian cops especially would say, well, this wouldn't be a law if it wasn't good. Therefore, because it's a law, I have to enforce it. And so they were doing kind of a good job in their conversation there of talking about God's law and that people, according to Christian theology, both need saving, cops or non-cops. But then they start to blur the line and say, it really kind of push at this idea that if it's a law, you're required to obey it. And how do I want to say it? They paint with an incredibly broad brush that says, I'm law and order, therefore, whatever law is on the books, it must be a good thing. And it's got to be worthy of enforcing. But yet when the law passes that they don't like, so when abortion was the law of the land, they were advocating for those laws to be broken and wanting to see them changed. And what I see in that regard, there again, you could be a staunch abolitionist, anti-abortionist. You could be staunch, but still not necessarily come down in the camp of we should be imprisoning mothers who want to get an abortion. And that there again is the problem that I see is that too many Christians are incredibly dogged on this mindset of we can use the laws to enforce what we want, but when law is used against us, when a law is used against us, then we can protest against that. And that to me is another form of that cognitive dissonance. So,
yeah,
I just want to make sure people who are in the chat are hearing that this is neither an apologetic for Christianity or an apologetic against Christianity. This conversation tonight is to look at a Christian who was in law enforcement, who has come out to say some things that I believe are incredibly dangerous. If somebody wants to reach out to me privately and have a conversation about my views as it regards specifically theology or philosophy, I'd be more than happy to do that. but I want people to hear a Christian, two Christians actually, tackling a Christian perspective on law enforcement that we both, and I can attest to this, Kevin will not correct me on this. His response to some of this was, this was bad. This just looked ugly. And that's why we're doing this tonight. And it goes back to, once again, to the roots of the show. I'm going to skip forward to the next minutes here. And there again, I want people to understand this is about Christians actually being able to call out other Christians when we think they're doing or misrepresenting something or doing something that's not inherently in keeping with sound theology from a Christian perspective. So
they don't see what I see, but they see that revolving door, especially as the culture. Probably one of the most difficult moments for me was defund the police when that happened.
Oops. So this part's really important because he's going to be pointing out a perspective here about cops who are Christian and cops who aren't Christian, and then and people in the criminal world and in their perspective, and in some of the influence of wrongdoing or evil here. And this is actually really important because he fails to make, in my eyes, fails to make a really important distinction.
When there were people viscerally angry with the even existence of law enforcement, who basically wanted to see law enforcement officers dead, whether they had anything to do with the most recent dust up or not. That was a really hard moment that I actually kind of had a breakdown in church one day, because I'm looking at something before. I think I had looked at something before I came to church that day and saw the most recent "We Hate Law Enforcement," and it just crushed me, because here was a world that wanted me dead just because I carried a badge. And you put someone in that environment and they don't understand the wickedness of man. They don't understand the wickedness that is inherent in all of us. And they don't understand that there is a solution that's spiritual.
And this is the problem that I had with this, Kevin, and I think you probably picked up on it too. If in your Christian theology you have an understanding that all people are not born neutral or born good, but are born in dire straits, born in desperate need of Christian salvation, if that's what your perspective is, then you don't get to look at the lost criminal world and see them as somehow separate from that distinction as your non-Christian cop buddies. If the drug, I won't even use that because I have a different perspective on a lot of people in my camp don't necessarily agree with me on drug use. I think it's consenting adults should be free to do drugs, whether I like the drugs or not. Psychedelics. But when you look at that and you look at the guy who's guilty of murder, and let's say he's clearly guilty of murder, and you see him as somehow more evil than your cop buddy who's not a Christian, there's a problem there. Because if you think everybody's depraved, we lost. Is it just me? No, maybe we lost Kevin. Can you guys hear me still? I'm going to keep going and trust that everybody can hear me. But if your perspective is that the world is bad, is full of lost people, and it looks like we lost Kevin. If your perspective is that the world is full of lost people, then that means your non-Christian cop buddies are just as bad as the people that you're arresting. And we don't see that from law enforcement. Christian law enforcement officers don't look at their non-Christian law enforcement buddies and say, well, you need Jesus. Because most of the time they see him as an ally in a fight against what they call evil. And in their eyes, the definition of evil is whatever law is on the books at the time, and you're breaking it, that makes you a bad guy. And I've experienced that personally. I've had people come at me, "You're not following the law. Like, you're not doing what the cops tell you to do. So you're a bad person. You can't even be X. You can't even be Y. You can't be Z." And Kevin is back. But you missed my diatribe. That's what happens when you kick yourself out of the stream, Kevin. You missed my diatribe.
Sorry about that. I knew my internet was struggling here, so I went over to my.
You know it's windy when the wind blows your internet away.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna skip forward here to about 1 hour and 10. Yeah, 1 hour and 10 minutes, and we're gonna listen to. Well, actually, I'm gonna go to the 1 hour and 2 minutes mark, and we're gonna listen to the part where that was the opening video that I shared with you guys.
Virtually every law enforcement agency in my state signed letters to our then governor. Praise God, he's not a governor anymore. Basically saying we will not enforce unconstitutional law, unconstitutional dictates from the governor's office. We'll help with education. We'll help inform the public. We are not going to enforce unconstitutional mandates.
Just as an aside, personally, law enforcement didn't even have any business doing any education during COVID, folks. That's not their role. That's not within their purview. It shouldn't have been. They shouldn't have even agreed to that. They should have looked at their governors and their mayors and said, "You want to send somebody out to the store to tell people why they need to wear a face mask? You go find a social worker or a volunteer doctor to do that. That's not going to be our job. We're not going to take those calls." Because here's why. When you call cops to a scene, cops go there with an us versus them mentality. And if the person they're trying to educate doesn't want to listen to them, next thing you know, they're asking for ID, which is like cookies to a third grader. And they're going to demand that ID just so they can educate you about mask wearing. And if you don't give them ID, then they're going to come up with a reason to arrest you. And if you don't think that's true, go watch all the auditing videos that are out there where people are getting arrested for refusing to ID, even though they're not doing anything wrong. So we're going to let Chris continue.
Praise God for that. A lot of law enforcement were put in very unenviable places, and a lot of armchair quarterbacking from people who have zero backbone to get up, strap on a duty belt and a badge to go do the job, but think they know how to tell the rest of the world how to do theirs. I'm just going to say from the bottom of my heart, how dare you? Bunch of armchair keyboard warriors. I had to keep my mouth shut quite a bit during that time, and I had to hide my disgust with a lot of Christians during that time.
I'd like to add something real quick, brother, in what you're saying, especially.
And Kevin, you know that this is the part that really got me. One, can I dare critique? I mean, is it fair of me to critique then, Kevin, because I had that experience? Do you think? I mean, do you feel like you can't critique the actions of law enforcement because you're not actually a cop? And do we apply that? And, you know, Kevin, if you could think of this in any other scenario, but do we apply that reasoning to any other position in the world? I'm like, I don't know, like Kevin, has your trash man ever spilled trash in your lot and your driveway, and like you feel like, well, I can't critique him. I'm not a garbage man. Oh, did I lose you again?
Well, I think I got bumped backstage, but
Oh, well, what I was saying was,
I heard you. I heard everything you said, and you're exactly right. I mean, of listening to this whole podcast.
What the happened again? Or listening to the whole thing, yeah.
Yeah, listening to the whole podcast. This was the part that I found cringy, I guess. I want to be nice again. I don't know the guy.
Yes, Nomadic Labs, you can get a ramen, by the way.
But yeah, I mean, you know, our cops can't be criticized. I mean,
Well,
you know,
I don't know that, because that's how I listen. This is exactly what he's saying. Unless you have the testicular fortitude, I
right,
I I I controlled myself there. Unless you
right,
have the testicular fortitude to go do the job, you can't critique it. I mean,
right.
what
Yeah.
you name, we critique soldiers all the time.
Well, I mean, what kind of a fallacy? That's some kind of a fallacy. I don't know what it is right off the top of my head, but that's just not that's not solid thinking. I mean, that's emotional thinking. Like you know, I told you when we talked about this, it kind of reminds me of watching Blue Bloods. Like, they can't do any law enforcement officers to the commissioner can't do anything wrong. Although, if they do something wrong, they punish them for it. But the default mode is
You
these
mean in the
guys
TV show? You mean in the
in the
TV show?
TV show. Yeah.
Yeah.
The default mode is these guys are pure. It's almost like a different classification. So, you've got in the Christian worldview, you've got Christian and non-Christian, right? But he's almost saying these guys are in sort of a different category, and they fall somewhere in there. They're better than the average populace, and therefore you shouldn't be able to be critical of them because you don't listen. Just because I've never worn a badge and been a police officer, it doesn't mean that I don't have the courage to do that. I think I do. I've done hard and distasteful things that a lot of people wouldn't want to do, but you were in the airborne, you jumped out of an airplane. A lot of people haven't done that, and a lot of people would never want to do that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be criticized as to how you packed your parachute or something like that, right? I mean,
Just as a note, that's why we had people who were specially trained to pack parachutes, because and you
that's why
always
you're
check this,
still that's why you're still here.
which is also why you always check to see who packed your parachute. And if it said Mickey Mouse or Ronald Reagan, you grabbed a different parachute. But but what it is really it's literally a Christian saying that Christians cannot critique anyone in law enforcement because you're not man enough to do what people in law enforcement do, which
Yeah.
then is now really identitarian politics within Christianity that's not supposed to be identitarian, and actually establishing that non-Christian cops are better than Christians who critique non-Christian cops for doing a bad job,
Yeah.
or Christian cops. You're literally saying these are better men than you, which flies in
Yeah.
the face of your theology. It's hypocrisy, is what it's absolute hypocrisy, and it's really. Go
I
ahead.
understand the emotion involved for him. I get that. I mean, that's his career. He's been in it. He's retired now, and he's been in it for his whole life, most of his adult life, I assume. I get the emotion involved in that, and my dad went through the Vietnam era. They people hated cops back then too. And so I understand that. I understand how emotions get involved in all that, but I don't think it's not a valid argument because not everybody's going to be a cop, and just because they're not doesn't make them less of a citizen, less of a patriot, less of a Christian, less of a criminal. I mean, whatever you want to do. There's one of my daughters is a registered nurse now, and she works third shift every night, which I know you used to do. I wouldn't want to do that. A lot of people
Well, that's
didn't.
because you don't have the guts.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, but it's a bad, and I don't know. It's just not a good way to make your case, I
No,
suppose.
not at all. All right, so this next part really, really, if it hadn't gotten under my skin before, this part really gets under me.
need for the gospel needs to be poured into the lives of law enforcement officers because they need Christ. But
that's very important. Very important. Like they do. Wait a minute. If they need Christ so bad, if you're not Christian law enforcement officers need Christ so bad, then why can you consider them to be good people, good enough to do the job? Like,
Yeah.
like it. I don't know. It
You
just
know,
anyway.
you know, it's kind of like bad theology, and this guy's not a bad theologian, right? I mean, he's a sharp guy. He runs in good theological circles, and you know, it's again, I think it's just his emotions have taken over here.
The next part's what really gets me.
now I'm speaking to Christians who, with all due respect, have no clue what they're talking about. Yeah, they may know things about guns. They may be tough guys. They may be, I'll protect my family. I'll do this. I'll defend. The cops are useless kind of thing. I'm talking to you. If you're so gung-ho, go get a badge. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to be part of that change, then honestly, I don't have time for you. Now, if you want to have a conversation, if you want to ask questions, if you want to actually learn, happy to talk to you. And I will be honest.
And that, to me, was he's basically calling people who he sees as Christian brothers and sisters, basically calling them cowards for critiquing law enforcement because they don't know what it's like. They don't know. They don't understand. And then saying, I don't have time for you.
I'm going to give the guy the benefit of the doubt here, Todd.
That's why I brought you on.
Yeah, I know. Because I don't know what he experienced that caused this reaction. Right? People said things to him. People did things to him, probably that called themselves Christians. I might even know one guy somewhere south of you that could have said things like that. That's it.
Yeah, I know.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So I don't know what the guy experienced. He obviously was, maligned and abused by some people, and so I get it. But his reaction to that it isn't helpful, for one, just not helpful. He can make his point without having to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess. It's almost like he's having the same reaction that other people probably had for him, like all cops are dirty and all cops are bad, and you're a bad guy because you're a cop. And so, all Christians that aren't taking up the badge, or if you're not, you're a coward and you're not, so it's just
you're a coward if you don't take up the badge and critique. That's what blows my mind, is like to be able to critique, you have to take up the badge, and if you don't take up the badge, then you're a coward.
I don't know what the best cliche, metaphor, or similitude is to paint with a broad brush or throw the baby out with the bathwater, but every single one of those things applies to his statement here. And again, giving him the benefit of the doubt, because I don't know what he experienced. He obviously is. I mean, you use the word triggered. He's triggered, right?
Oh, yeah, he's that's. Well, ironically, because you talk so much about, because guns. Yeah, you know guns, all right. You're triggered here. So the next part that I'm gonna. I'm sorry, Kevin. By the way, folks, Kevin is a recent gun nut. So just want to point that out.
I don't know.
But he doesn't own any guns. He lost them all in a terrible fire.
They were stolen.
They were stolen in a terrible fire boating accident.
Yeah, just don't break into my house.
Yes, because Kevin still has fire. I lost track of what I was. I knew tonight was going to be fun. Part of me is I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. I'm not looking at the chat so much right now because there are people. I love that people are interacting, but they're losing sight of what we're talking about.
Mm.
This next part's very important.
Undermine and and cut us out. To this day, I still hold Barack Obama accountable for the 5 deaths of officers, I believe it was in Texas, who were shot because of his rhetoric. And by the way, I blame Russell Moore for that too.
I just out of curiosity, is Donald Trump responsible for everybody that was murdered in Nevada by the in Las Vegas?
Yeah,
I'm just like, I
that's
don't like
rough,
Donald
man.
Trump.
I mean,
I I don't like Donald Trump. I don't like Barack. I don't like Biden. But I'm not going to hold him accountable for the act of every single wicked, evil person that does something wicked and evil.
I mean, people are responsible for their own actions, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, I agree. Obama has had rhetoric. I mean, if Trump isn't the king of rhetoric, I don't know who is. But you can't hold those people responsible. That's just not even.
Yeah,
It's not even good in any way.
but like I said, the next part where we're going to hear a little bit about compassion here.
Because he jumped on that bandwagon, and that's why I'm blocked by him on Twitter.
We've all bragged about who we've been blocked by. I just want to make sure everybody knows that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I disagree with him in his distaste for Russell Moore, but
Touche.
whatever.
Days I wanted to walk away and tell everyone in the world, do it yourself. And my job wasn't patrol. My job wasn't running to the call down the street for the domestic, and then the call down the street for the burglary, and the call down the street after that for the child out of control whose parents were like, fix him. I didn't have to do that. I got to deal with the after effect. I got to deal with them and deal with their problems once they'd been convicted, once that they had been adjudicated. And now they had been, hey, Officer Honholtz, your job is to fix them. And yet, the sheer volume of armchair quarterbacking from people, some people whom I have great respect for, there were days I just wanted to put the badge on the desk and walk away. Why? Zero compassion. Zero compassion from my brothers and sisters in Christ. You all have no idea how hard it is to come online some days and look at a situation and go, yeah, I don't think that was a good one. Yeah, all right, well, maybe there was something, okay, I get, maybe there's a little bit more to the story. And in the meantime, all y'all are condemning people with zero information. That was hard. I have long advocated for Christians need to have balance. We are so swept up, just like everybody else, on whatever the newest bandwagon is. My word, we are terrible at this. And I've been guilty of it. I say we, inclusive of myself. Why am I having this? Why am I saying this? Why am I getting kind of lectury? I apologize. I just say that environment.
So what Chris does here is he goes on and he brings up this, he's mentioned compassion. Where's the compassion? And that's the issue, is that Christians are supposed to have this compassion, and we're not supposed to judge. But sometimes when we look at things, I'm going to bring up Uvalde, Texas. Like, if you're a Christian and you're watching the cops in Uvalde, Texas, and this is one of the worst case scenarios. I don't even want to touch on all the tiny little infringements on people's lives. From telling somebody they're not allowed to film you while you're in the course of your duties, going in at the behest of somebody in a public building and running somebody off and threatening to trespass them. All of those are tiny little minor infractions that to me add up and they're bad. But let's just take the scenario of Uvalde, Texas, and you have the tenacity to say that you don't have enough information, and Christian, you owe it to the cops on the scene to have compassion because you don't have all the information. No one needs any more information than to watch dozens of cops sit in a hallway for almost 2 hours listening to someone use a firearm on non-adult people. I'm very careful how I say this because I don't want this taken down. Like, using a firearm on non-adult people and not rushing in and rescuing them, but instead turning around and using tasers on the parents who is like, enough. I want to go in and rescue my child. And I'm supposed to sit back and not judge that because I don't have all the information? This, my friends, is why I have a problem with the Christian worship of cops. And I'm sorry if they don't like it, but that's what it is. It is a worship. There is a worshipful mindset in Christians with cops that to me is completely misplaced, based on intentional doctrinal misinformation that you have to back police and misapply compassion. What about compassion for people that cops should have? I could show you video after video after video after video of cops laughing about the after effects of using force on people. I think her name's Karen Garner. I might have her last name wrong, but it's an older lady. She has Alzheimer's. She walks into a Walmart. She walks out with stuff, and they pick this woman up and slam her down on the ground, rough her up, throw her in the back of the car, take her to the police department, and they watch the video back, and they laugh after they broke this woman's body in pieces. I think she ended up with like a broken forearm and a broken collarbone and something like that. And they laughed. Where is the demand for compassion on these public servants?
Yeah.
But you don't have all the information, so you can't critique.
Yeah, I mean, your example of Uvalde is a really good one because, like, just because I've never been a police officer, I can't be critical of that. It just doesn't make any sense. And, I'm not saying cops don't get hostility. I know they do. And, but other occupations get hostility too. And, maybe not in the same manner or whatever. It's just, it's a poor argument. And it's an emotional argument. And, I'm sure he's a good guy, Chris, but I don't know him. And so I don't know what sort of set him off on this. It was obviously something was bothering him and he wanted to get it off his chest, and he had the opportunity to do it on his own show. So yeah, it's, he's got the right to say whatever he wants, but we also, I think, owe him some responsibility to say, I think you were out of bounds in some of these areas. I think you missed the mark,
Well, and the other thing that I want to say about this too, and there again, I don't know Chris at all. I mean, I've interacted with him in years past, before I got permanently yeeted off of Facebook. Which is how I met Kevin, by the way, folks. Social media is great for some things. Other things, not so much. Do not meet your next spouse from an Eastern European country if you're single, by the way. But if you do happen to be a fan of Flex Your Freedoms and you spot Ming Ling, if you know what I'm talking about, if you spot Ming Ling, please reach out to Flex Your Freedoms and BCNN. They are looking for as much information as Ming Ling as possible, and social media would be a good way to track down Ming Ling. So, but it's a long story. But the critique, like you said, they're owed a critique. And what I'm hearing in this is that, like, here's this it's almost this verbal outrage that's coming out of him that's been pent up for years. It's been pent up for years. And I'm saying, because he had made earlier in the show, he had made the comment that, well, that doesn't mean every cop is just a ticking time bomb. And I'm like, this sounds a little bit like a pressure cooker letting off some steam. And had you stayed in the job another 6 months, year and a half, what would have happened? What? And I'll address a little bit of that at the end. What could have happened? Because this is what happens when that pressure is held in. And I'm not saying that it's okay that cops hold pressure in and then blow up eventually. But this is why I talk so much about the ones that are in need to get help. So
Yeah.
something gets said here in this next spot that I'll just touch on briefly.
You can look at the product of your hands and go, I did this today. What is the single most difficult thing of a law enforcement career? What on earth did I accomplish today?
That's all we need. That it every day. And this is just me and Kevin. I know you heard me say this in the years that we knew each other. After we met, I had already been working for the Hempstead County Sheriff's Office. You and I know we talked about this. I would say, not tongue in cheek, but seriously, I have a goal that at the beginning of my shift to have a positive impact on the life and the life decisions of the people that I'm supervising today.
Yeah.
And I have a string of people who now follow me on this channel who are people that I had that positive impact on. If your entire career as a member of the law enforcement world leaves you saying, what did I accomplish today? That says so much about the law enforcement world, where you walk away from your shift every day and at the end of your career and saying, I don't know that I accomplished anything. That's a problem. That's a massive problem.
Yeah, I feel
Why
bad
do
for the
we do
guy that if he spent however many years doing this and he feels like he didn't really make any kind of a difference. I mean, that's got to be a heavy burden to bear, I mean, it's just like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what goes on in his, between his ears, but he's kind of letting us know right here that he felt like this whole career wasn't really that, it doesn't really help anybody. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's probably, maybe you feel that way, I mean, the world is pretty rough, no doubt about it. You're dealing with people that are, just criminals all the time. And, I'm sure that there's a lot of struggle to have a positive impact on people. I mean, wouldn't make me upset with him. It makes me feel bad for him,
Yeah, that was not me being angry, but that's me saying, like, I've
I
talked to
know.
many people who are still in the law enforcement world and people who are out now who said, I don't know what I accomplished. That's that like at some point you have to realize that when you wake up to that realization, that's time for you to go.
Yeah.
It's you have got, and that I think is ultimately, Chris says early on in the show, like I decided to retire even earlier than I was going to retire. And
Yeah.
I'm glad
Probably good he did.
that he made that. Yeah, like for sure. The next part
What's
I want
the
everybody
saying?
to
You want to make everybody happy, go serve ice cream or something like that. There's a quote
that
by
doesn't work
somebody.
either because I know a lot of lactose intolerant people. So
I mean, I don't want to serve people ice cream.
all right, the next part, this next part is very pivotal, and it says a lot about the entire mentality of law enforcement. And this kind of relates to things like, 4 years ago, when I launched the channel today, YouTube gave me a happy birthday to your channel message when I logged on, by the way. So Happy birthday to Minnesota Black Robe Regiment podcast. Happy anniversary. Thank you guys for coming for the extravaganza. But this part really says so much, and this does go back to what a lot of what we saw in 2020. And I'll play the video here again at the end, and then probably put that up separately as a separate video to watch. It says a lot about the mindset of law enforcement throughout 2020 in the response to COOF. But listen closely to what Chris says here.
Life behind me. But I will always be grateful that the Lord took 24, almost 25 years of my life and formed me into the man that I am through some of the hardest trials that anybody can go through. And I just hope you guys can recognize that when you see those law enforcement officers on a news article, or when they pull you over for speeding and you didn't think you should have got a ticket, or you want to judge them because of something that, some law or mandate that maybe is questionable that they should be enforcing. If I can
that I'm gonna play that again.
The Lord took, and I just hope you guys can recognize that when you see those law enforcement officers on a news article, or when they pull you over for speeding and you didn't think you should have got a ticket, or you want to judge them because of something that, some law or mandate that maybe is questionable that they should be enforcing.
Folks, that right there, and Kevin, if you think I'm being hyperbolic, please tell me. That right there is, you need to have compassion on these officers when you see them enforcing something that you don't think they should be enforcing, and even that they would acknowledge is a questionable order or mandate. You just have to understand, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is exactly the gist of what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's wrong, they have a job to do, and you need to be compassionate.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not what he was saying?
Yeah, I believe so.
And he said it. He said it tenderly. He
Yeah.
wasn't. He said it tenderly, but even in that, it's wrong. It's a really bad mindset.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I don't think anybody gets into anything knowing how it's going to go in 10, 15, 20 years, right? Like, you go into law enforcement, go into the military thinking you're going to be a hero, or you're going to, fight for the country or save people, protect and serve, whatever. You have this pie in the sky view of how it's going to go. And then 10 years later, 15 years later, it wasn't really all that you thought it would be. And people shoot back in the military, and, it's just hard. Life is hard. So I think that he recognizes the fact that as a law enforcement officer, you're open to a lot more criticism. And I think he's lamenting the fact that they shouldn't be criticized as much as they are. I mean, I think that's kind of the point of the whole show. And I think he's feeling pretty beat up maybe over his career.
And I think it's, I can't read motives, but I'm hearing cognitive dissonance playing out in this moment right here, in this genteel, very like open and transparent. I'm feeling this compassion for him in this section, even though what he's saying to me is terribly wrong, and it lends itself to tyrannical abuse. I'm hearing the cognitive dissonance, where he knows that he was taking part in things that were wrong, but he's got to justify it in his mind because, well, it was my job and I just had to do it. And I want to point out that there was a place in the history of our world 82 years ago where, I'm sorry, but I was just doing my job, resulted in a lot of people going to the gallows.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not saying that's what should happen today, but that's where the mindset starts to creep in. And I want to add to that. If you don't think this can happen to your local cop in your small town or your beat cop in your neighborhood, I want you guys to all go out and find the book, whether you read it in a hard copy or you read it through Audible or something. There's a book called Ordinary Men. I want everyone here to go and read Ordinary Men. It's about a German reserve police battalion called up during World War II. And we're talking like plumbers and bakers and craftsmen, and carpenters and attorneys and newspapermen called up to go and be policemen in this reserve German battalion during World War II. And then tell me that this couldn't happen to the guy that lives next to you and drives a cruiser home every night. And that's this mentality. It can happen to you. It can happen to the guys next to you. Now we're going to listen to the next section here, which follows this very closely.
If I can encourage you in anything from this podcast, and we did not intend to have this conversation, like Rich said.
Side note, maybe if you didn't intend to have this conversation, maybe don't air it.
Yeah.
Show compassion. I'm not saying don't hold them accountable. Absolutely, please do. We drew from the same sinful pool of humanity that every one of your career fields draw from. Guess what? You got to deal with bad employees. So did we.
I'm about to lose my mind.
But you don't want your career field maligned because there are bad employees inside of it. Please don't do that to ours. Hold them accountable, absolutely.
Okay. Kevin, bring me down. Because if I'm a bad warehouse worker, I don't have the power to go out into the street and stop you for some trumped up reason, pull you out of your car, slap torture cuffs on you, and then when you ask me why and fight me, pull out an electronic interruption device and use it on you and then throw you in the back of my car and take your freedom away. If I'm a bad teacher, I don't normally have the ability to like shoot you for getting an F on a paper. I don't have that ability. I mean, I'm not saying this never happened, but there's something to be said about the reality that when you're a bad cop and you're surrounded by bad cops, those bad cops have the power to literally kill people with the justification and the backing of the state. A bad pharmacist might mix medications wrong. They will pay a higher penalty than the cop who throws an old lady down on the ground and breaks her shoulder and she ends up like in the hospital and dying of sepsis. Like no, you don't get to say that. Every career field has bad people in it. Yes, but not every career field has a backing of the state to imprison you. Okay, I told you I didn't lose it as bad as I thought I was going to, but
yeah, it's just poor. I don't know. It's again, I've said it several times. It's way too emotional for the career field. And, it's just like, I want to honor and respect the police. They're given a tough job, no doubt about it. But if there's a cop doing a bad thing or a bad job, he needs to be held accountable to it, as the guy says. But he should also be criticized. Okay, so I live here in New Mexico. So what was happening here with our police, and I think it was Albuquerque Police Department, APD.
Yeah,
they had a scheme running, huh?
Yeah, you guys are in the thick of it.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you
So
got
they
you
were
got
doing
the
a
audience.
drunken driving deal. Yeah. So, these guys they all quit before they got fired or brought up on disciplinary action. Hopefully they'll still face some kind of a disciplinary action, but you don't just get away with that stuff, right? I
Look,
mean, you
when the
shouldn't.
FBI's
What
got to
if,
step in.
yeah.
Well, and
Where,
Brian from Here's the
how high does the
Deal.
corruption go?
Well, precisely. Brian from Here's the Deal shared a video. I think it was today. I think it was a Honolulu, a news story about Honolulu Police Department or the DUI arrest from 2022 and 2023, and they had they ended up having to admit that, like, literally in 2023 they had something along the lines of, and I'm going to get it wrong. It was like 1,500 arrests for DUI. Of that 1,500, only 1,300 were actually charged. Were actually
Mm-hmm.
charged because it was a scheme. You have the
Yeah.
Kansas State Patrol fighting with the Supreme Court with the courts right now for practicing what's been euphemistically is now being referred to as a Kansas two-step. It's literally a methodology where they end the traffic stop, but then come back to your car after they take 2 steps away and engage you again. And the courts are talking about it as a terrible, terrible violation of people's constitutional rights.
Yeah.
Folks,
Yeah.
Kevin's
Like,
getting ready. I've talked Kevin into sleep here, so we're almost done. So we're going to finish up the last couple of minutes here that I wanted to play of Dave and his or excuse me, not Dave, Chris and his co-host, and we're gonna listen and then we'll let Kevin do some final thoughts, and then I'll chat a little bit more with you guys.
Healthy skepticism, 100% support it. Broad brushed attacks against law enforcement and hatred for law enforcement because it doesn't fit your paradigm, I got zero time or respect for. Respect and compassion, I'm down for that because I think scripture teaches us to do that. Yeah, by all means, when it's necessary, speak like John the Baptist, speak like Christ, whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones, right? You tell that fox, Herod, God, yeah, absolutely. There are times when you got to do it, and it's biblical. But every one of us was commanded to esteem others better than ourselves. Every one of us was commanded by Christ to show love and compassion. Every one of us was commanded to show kindness and mercy. And if you can't do that, and I don't care if it's my career field or anybody else's, your argument is with Christ, not with me.
So my question, and I won't play any more of the comments, that Chris goes on at 1 hour and 35 minutes and says that he's willing to have a conversation with people, but ultimately says not. If you're coming in here to criticize me, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And it's really this part, especially where he says Christians especially, but all of us are commanded to treat others, esteem others as more important than ourselves. Does that apply to cops? Does that apply to cops, Christian or not? And what he's doing is he's taking this and applying it to Christians especially, but other people who would critique and saying, oh yeah, when it's necessary, be like John the Baptist, who, and if you don't know John the Baptist, he lost his head for critiquing the leader. But just so you know, folks, John Baptist died for critiquing leaders. So I would strongly suggest that you think about being John the Baptist to law enforcement, because you don't want to be John the Baptist to law enforcement. But that's a little dark Christian humor. But anyway, Kevin, does that not apply then? If whether you're a Christian cop or a non-Christian cop, if I'm supposed to esteem others as more important than myself, does that not mean that I'm supposed to then show that same compassion and that same esteem as a cop to people on the street that I'm dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly goes both ways. And I think we have to categorize things properly, right? Like we have to talk about Christians as a subset of society, that your standards are going to be different than probably what the unbelieving world is going to carry. So yeah, of course, but I don't know. It kind of feels like he conflates some things. He just kind of mashes them together and mixing it all up. And it's more emotion driven again, like I've said way too many times. Um, and I get it. He's venting primarily.
Sure.
This is
Absolutely.
a venting podcast, and for him, for his career, for his maybe looking back on his life or whatever. I mean, he's not. I don't think he's a bad guy in any way, shape, or form. I think he's frustrated. He's frustrated with the career. He's frustrated with the way people have interacted with him. So I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt on all of that stuff, but I think your point here by hosting this is you want to say, listen, we got to really analyze what is being said here, and we should filter this through good logical thinking. And as a Christian, we should filter it through a Christian worldview. And does this all make sense to us? And it doesn't, from all of that perspective. But I guess I kind of walk away just going, man, I feel pretty bad for this guy because I don't know. I mean, he talks some other time about going through a hard time with his wife, and I would certainly have empathy for all of that. But man, it's just like,
Well,
I don't
but
think your
even in that,
arguments made sense.
but even in that section, he talks about like, and I feel for him. Like anybody that's got a spouse or a child or a
Yeah.
parent or just anybody they care about, like like we have a mutual friend who's got a spouse that's in constant state of pain, and and
Yeah.
and it's so painful. It's so hard, and I like I feel that compassion, and that Chris talks about his wife and her battle with cancer and how
Hmm.
brave and bold she was and continued to homeschool through all of that. Like whether or not you like home education doesn't matter. This is a tough thing, and she did it, and he used that to then turn around and attack his brothers and sisters there again because he's critiquing Christian response to law enforcement and say, and my wife's braver than all of you. And like, dude, you didn't need to do that. Like that wasn't
Yeah.
necessary. And it was actually really kind of like it stole away the desire to feel the compassion and the empathy
Yeah.
for that moment.
Yeah. He could have, if the idea is to critique and, not critique in a positive way, right? I mean, offer criticism where we think it's valid without being personal toward him because, we trust that he's a good brother in the Lord and he's a good man and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean we can't offer criticism. He could have done this if he wanted to and voiced these issues that were bothering him without kind of throwing people under the bus, that even if they had criticized this and they were off base, you can still criticize them without being
Yeah.
critical. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I just think that the whole video or the whole podcast could have been done in a different way. And again, like it was off the cuff, obviously it was ab lib. Like you said, you should have done some heavy editing or not posted it.
Yeah. And it's like I put stuff out that I'm like I look back on it and I leave it up because I'm like now it just looks like I'm trying to hide. So but there's something to be said for transparency. So so I'll just leave it at that.
I mean,
But
I've got articles that I want to take down and I haven't, but I should, and I just haven't. But there's always, we grow, like, right? We grow as men, we grow as Christians, we mature in our thinking and stuff like that. And then sometimes we regress, and Lord help us.
well, K2, that's my
K2.
euphemistic. That's my euphemistic bro affectionate name for my buddy Kevin here, folks. If you if you're interested in reading some thoughtful philosophical work, Kevin has a website where he addresses spiritual abuse, and especially if you're not a Christian, those non-Christians that are watching, I would encourage you to go read and interact with Kevin. He has a lot more. He's far more intellectual than I am, and he's a very patient person, as you can tell. And it's good for me to have him in my life. But Kevin, where can they find your writing?
I primarily write at uncommonfaith.org, uncommonfaith.org. And again, like you mentioned, I have just articles, stuff that pops into my head. I have a section on spiritual abuse because we've been through that. I'm a seminary student, so I write some theological papers. I've even maybe posted a couple sermons there, but just some other stuff that most people won't find interesting. But if you do, have a look.
And before you go, sir, I just need to let you know that we did receive a call about your behavior and your activity, and people have said they're suspicious. So I'm going to need to see your ID. So if you give me your social security number, as well as
Bank account.
where are you going and where are you coming from?
Yes. Okay. Sounds good.
Well, I really appreciate you hanging out and going through that with me and sharing your thoughts. I know this is probably not the bank, the fireworks banger that everybody was expecting. Next year, though, for the 5-year anniversary, it will be a whiz banger. We're gonna rent a hall, and I'm bringing in speakers and guests, and
you need to get somebody more interesting on than me, but thanks for having me.
He's coming. He's coming on next.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and
thanks a lot, man.
Thanks for your friendship, and thanks for inviting me in on this one. That was I was honored to do so, and blessings to you, brother. We'll talk soon.
Well, and to you and yours, give your significant other a hearty hello and a hug for me.
Will do, brother.
Take care.
All right. God bless. I'm out. All right. Bye.
Stephen Lowell. Now,
guilty as charged.
Don't admit anything.
I cannot get this. I cannot get this thing to turn on speakerphone to save a life.
Can you hear me at all?
Oh, I can hear you. It's just it's only.
We're good.
Let me see what the other options here.
You're coming through loud and clear because I are professional.
Oh, there we go. No, just whoever wrote the software mislabeled headphone or earpiece as speakerphone. So I tested out something that shouldn't have worked, and it worked great.
Well, good. Steven said he wanted to come on, so I don't know what he wants to say, but it's 9:55, and Steven's up past his bedtime.
I am actually. I usually work out in the mornings 3 days a week, so that's why I messaged you, because I was like, oh man, I got to be up at 4:45, so I can't be up too much later.
My entire day is a workout, and then I come home and work out, so you're kind of slacking.
That's fair. That's fair. I need to up my game
here. So I really appreciate you were a guest. Oh gosh, what's it been now? Last election cycle, actually. You were a guest the last election cycle when you were running for Senate in Minnesota as a GOPer. You are now the interim chair for the Constitutional Republic Party here in Minnesota. Because Bull stepped down to. Oh, you are official. Oh, did you get the acclamation?
We had our convention this last weekend. It was a banger, and yes, I was officially elected to the seat. And Pat is also the official vice chair now.
I think it's. I think that it's fitting that Pat would be vice. I'm gonna let it.
Pat is wonderful. He
He is. He is. I love Pat. I just think it's fitting that he be vice because I just.
There are some of us who are at our best when we have strong advisory. I'm
Yeah.
one of
Oh,
them, but also definitely Pat. Pat loves to go all the way, and I love him for it. I really do. And so being vice chair
so
allows
you
him
you
exactly
are.
enough latitude to be as outrageous as he can get away with, and it makes it perfect. It's a perfect harmony. Perfect harmony. I like it.
So you are now Mr. Chair of the Constitutional Republic Party, and you were on when you ran for office, and you have been a good friend of the show and kind of a constant presence since we connected years. Well, that's not years ago, but it feels like it now. But probably almost 4 years ago, we first started connecting in events and rallies and whatnot. So. Uh,
Oh yeah.
what keeps you around?
I mostly my experiences in the riots, funny enough, because I mean, this is small town Minnesota, right? Like we don't really expect super big things to happen here. And then the whole George Floyd thing caused such an outrageous meltdown in the state. I got to watch places that I grew up burn to the ground. And after I saw that, it made I mean, I knew, like, in theory, yes, buildings can burn, and technically speaking, places you grew up may not be there anymore when you grow up. But seeing that happen by force was quite the wake up call. That oh yes, it can happen, whatever the hell it is, and it
Oh,
can happen here.
yeah. I was kind of saying that about a little bit when I told people to read the book Ordinary Men, which is about the
Mm,
Sherman Reserve Police Battalion, and everybody thinks it could never happen to the officers in their own neighborhood, or their own small town. And I'm like, oh, so says these people. So,
right.
but more than anything, like now that we know it's kind of kept you around and active, what's kept you coming back to the Minnesota Black Robe Regiment show?
Mostly because I really, really, really like you.
Oh
Your
God,
content's good. You're a really good, like an impressively good person. You have people. I mean,
I'm
step
gonna.
one is to have convictions at all. So, and people who do have convictions are usually a smaller subset of the whole. I would say arguably less than half, maybe somewhere between a third and 40%.
I
It's
was
not a large
mostly
number.
looking for you to tell people I pay you, but that you went and actually sent
Well,
me stuff.
we agreed we wouldn't talk about that tonight, but since you brought it up, I guess.
Well, it's the anniversary, so I'm an
Hey,
entire zero Coke in. So, but
but
no,
no,
I
no.
I appreciate that. That's kind. You know how I do not do well with nice things when people say nice things about me, and so now I'm just all like,
Well, I mean, I'm so wordy because I do say nice things, but it's important for me to underpin those because if I don't, they just seem like platitudes. And like, because it's easy to say nice things, but
oh
there's
yeah.
reasons I say them and good arguments I have behind them, and I can check every single one of those boxes off with startling clarity.
Well, and that's the thing that when we first started to connect, there again, geez, I think that maybe the first time we ever kind of realized that we were connecting probably would have been on the front lawn of the Capitol building during a rally at some point. I can't even remember which one it would have been, but
That
it
may have been the first time I saw you, and then the first time I met you was actually in front of the governor's mansion when Antifa had organized quite the display, and the
mm,
St. Paul Police Department thought that was just a all right.
yeah, that was the day that I even carried a long gun that
Which,
day. Look, it
which
was
crazy
yeah,
enough, you would come to those kinds of parties, but not always dressed to impress. That afternoon, you did not disappoint.
yeah. I was that was a very and I had a a passenger that day who was terrified. She was like, "Can I ride with?" And I'm like, "Yeah, this is gonna be fine." And we got there. She goes, "You brought a gun." I'm like, "Well, I always have a gun." I'm like, but I don't always have this gun. And she's like, I'm like, I've heard things, and those things turned out to be very true. And it was part of the scales falling off my eyes, quite honestly, when it came to law enforcement in Minnesota, because we got set the hell up. We got set up. Like, the St. Paul police and the state patrol, who were responsible for security of the governor's mansion, like, marched these yahoos from the buses that they bust them in on, marched them down the street, and allowed them to vandalize people's vehicles and attack people.
I mean, it's a heck of a thing, and I ended up establishing a couple of pretty notable contacts through SPPD, and I'm glad that I did. There was a fair bit of good that came out of that, but I spent pretty much the whole next day climbing the entire phone network all the way up St. Paul Police, because I would explain to the first person and say, "Hi, my name's Steven, and I'm a resident of these Twin Cities, and I had a bit of an issue at the governor's mansion with some things that were done, and more notably not done. And I'd like to know if that's acceptable to you guys, if you guys are okay with that, or if maybe that was just sort of dropping the ball, or kind of what's going on, because you had about 300 people performing Roman battle formations with melee weapons and clear, explicit intent, not like, oh, well, they were just waving, provocative signs. No, they had clubs, batons, and shields, and they had a target. And
Yeah,
they
they
were
were.
more than happy to
Yeah,
circumvent the rather pathetic police barricades intended to separate the two parties by just going around the block,
yeah.
shocking absolutely no one. And while
If
I
you
don't,
guys,
sorry, go ahead.
if you guys are interested in seeing, there on my channel, there is a breakdown of that video. I have video breakdown of that event. Like, you could sit here and say it never happened, but it happened, and I have the video proof of it. And it's it's there. It, and when I look back on the last 4 years, and my story now, and in fact, actually, you had no idea for the longest time, ironically, what I even was doing for a living while all of that was going on, which is what ended up costing me my career. Is they kept saying, "Oh, you're dangerous," because you're not, people are going to figure out where. I'm like, nobody knew where I worked. I had a newspaper reporter in the midst of me just, going to bat for Lisa Hanson. And we all know Lisa. Uh, Going to bat for Lisa Hanson, called me up, "Where do you work?" I'm like, "I'm not telling you that." He goes, "Well, why not?" I'm like, "It's none of your business. It's got nothing to do with what I'm doing." And of all the people who never thought to ask, and never went like, "Oh, this guy might be a Fed." You never once had any idea until I finally told everybody what had happened.
Right.
Which kind of goes to show, which is another reason the scales really fell off my eyes, which was, I watched 95 to 98% of law enforcement in the state of Minnesota being willing to do whatever tyrants told them to do, as long as it meant they kept their jobs and kept their paychecks and their pensions.
It's
So,
it's a heavy chain. It's a heavy
yeah,
chain, and
yeah,
admittedly, and I don't say this in defense of poor police behavior at all whatsoever, but I will say that
I get you.
you will be hard pressed. Police, CEOs, grocery baggers, you would be hard pressed to find somebody who, by conviction alone, I'll refer back to my rarity of individuals with convictions statement, who will take intentional action with full knowledge that they will likely be jeopardizing their legacy, their future, at least in terms of their immediate earnings. Um, for those convictions. In fact, what I was going to go on to say about that was, you have a third to 40% of any given large population, and we'll put a large population number at, I don't know, over 2 million, we'll say, who actually have convictions, something they could describe as a conviction. If you ask like the vast majority would, do you have any convictions? They're going to be like, no, I have a clean record. And so for the most
Thank you.
part,
I needed the lighthearted comment. I was getting
but
emotional.
so of that, of that 1/3, 36 to 40%, you're going to have maybe 20-ish, or we'll call it whatever, about 40 to 50% of that is going to be people who not only have convictions but understand them sufficient to justify action, and then not carry out action just to justify it. Just the kind of people who be like, I can't believe that. I'd stand up and do this. And then, you'll have an even smaller subset, pardon me, of people willing not only to not only who not only have conviction and have conviction sufficiently understood to justify action, but are willing to act. And then there's an itty bitty teeny tiny wedge of that pie who have all of the above, and they're willing to take action that will result in personal sacrifice, because that's very rare. Very rarely will people take on personal sacrifice for much of anything, but definitely in terms of just their personal convictions. That's a rare lot. And so, given that your garden variety personality, what do I call that, personality profile of somebody who would wear a badge and carry a gun, which is heroic to at least a degree, depending on who you do it for and the things you do in the name of it. But a very, very consistent personality profile of the individuals who choose to do that are people who are habitual rule followers. They like following the rules, regardless of how crappy they are. And that becomes kind of a conflict when you have tyrants writing those rules. Tyrants who don't care about the people who have to enforce them, and they don't care about the people who are getting them enforced upon. And so, like, it's one of those things where, like, I watched that day and I thought to myself, this tracks, but I hate it. I fully expected this, but I was hoping to be wrong. I wanted to be really, really wrong. Like, not even wrong, so wrong.
Right. Yeah. Like,
But
just
unfortunately,
yeah, like, it really does kind of come down to like, I'll just use an example. Um, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, but at 4.5, 5 years ago, Kanye West came out. I'm a Christian now. I'm a Christian. And
yeah,
he was running in the kind of Christian circles that I would have been running in. It probably still would to some degree. Uh, and a lot of the people in that sphere the friends got really mad at me because I'm like, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Everybody's super excited because I'm just not going to rush to the Kanye. Oh, well, he's on our side now, so we gotta, it's kind of like the way people embrace Brandon Tatum, or
yeah,
Donut
yeah,
Operator or Candace Owens, or
for sure.
it's like, oh well, got to embrace them because they say they're on our side, and like let's just. I'm not saying that Candace Owens and Brandon Tatum aren't necessarily conservative, but I'm saying that there's a rush to advance people like that. It's the same thing with what they did with Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yes.
Oh, he's a by his own description, a flaming homosexual. Was now apparently he's not. I don't know, but um, they rushed and said, "Look at this flaming homosexual who's a conservative and he supports," and he called him Daddy Trump, which is just weird. But um,
I think the term for that is based. That was
based,
based.
yes, that was
But
based.
anyway,
No,
yes.
it was weird. But they were embracing Kanye, 5 years ago or whatever, because he came out as a Christian. He was running in the right Christian circles, and I said, "No, I'm not going to do it." And I had people that were like ending their friendships with me because I was being so judgmental. Well, what Kanye come out and do? He just announced that he's launching a pornography studio. Well, okay, people.
And
Yep.
that's where the theory that which
I
I
just
can't
don't
even
like
believe
being
I'm
right. I really don't like being right, Steven. I don't. I hate, no, you laugh, but even when I'm like, yeah, I told you I was right, I don't like it. It's a scuzzy feeling. It literally is. It's scuzzy. I did not like being right in 2020. I predicted
I don't
everything.
think anybody liked being right in 2020. Being right in 2020 was like it was a pandemic of its own.
Well, yeah, but 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 it didn't feel good to have people coming up to me and saying, "How did you know?" And I'm like, "How did you not know? Like that's you how could you not see this coming? You're like you're like got some sort of magic mental powers." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's called paying attention. That's my magic power. That's my gift." And
Powers of observation.
yeah,
Breathtaking.
there we go. But I feel the same way now about everything that I've been saying for years, but even before 2020, but especially into 2020. And now that I literally gave up a career, and I was damn good at it. I
I
I was really good at it.
yeah.
And would I change it? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't change what I did. I wouldn't go back. And I don't know that I took some of you noticed. I took some time off in the middle of December. I had crap going on, and doing this was just like it was an afterthought. There's just no reason for. I'm like right now, I just don't have the time or the energy, and I needed a break. But I gave up so damn much, friendships. And what do you say about friendships that don't last through times like this, right? Like, were they really friends? But friendships, family members that will not talk to me because of my viewpoints now. I'm a hater. You're evil. I'm like, just evil. Family members, you're evil. You're bitter. You're angry. And I'm like, why aren't you angry? Why aren't you bitter? Like, 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 I suppose you flip
See,
cops off. I'm like, sometimes.
we come to conclusions faster than most, and that's something that the philosophically minded, I guess, um, are afflicted with, really, because the more thinking you do, and the more you learn how to think, the more you learn, and you learn at an accelerated rate because you consistently consider and consider and consider ideas, concepts, theories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you take in information and then you collate it and you reorganize it and you view it in aggregate, you view it in isolation, and you keep doing it over and over and over and over and over. And some folks do that process a lot faster than others. And the downside to that, of course, is you you catch things years often before. And sometimes it's because the writing's on the wall, but to read the writing is to understand it. And to understand it is to put yourself in a position where you must accept it as a potential reality or an actual reality. And many people just don't have the fortitude to process it. They just don't. They would rather ignore it or pretend it isn't nearly as bad as it actually is, because that would make their life, I guess, less suffering. And I sympathize with that. I really, really
Yeah.
do, because, and I don't even consider I used to call it burying your head in the sand a fair bit, but in all honesty, the kind of diabolical things that we perceive these days and experience are truly beyond the minds of most, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think to understand and accept a lot of these things would put a lot of people in a bad way, and maybe there is a thread of reason to glossing over a fair bit of it. And I mean, that comes at a heavy cost, a cost that the people who, whether you don't want to admit to yourself that it is reality or not, um, end up paying depending on which very short straw they may draw. But yeah, I think that's part of the reason why it's so easy to get through some of the terrible legislature that we have, because honestly, the lies that the politicians spin are so much more lighthearted, really, than the
Well,
reality of it,
they're
than the
palatable.
brass
They're just
tacks.
they're just
You know,
palatable. That people just
right?
people just want to hear them. They just They just have a desire to have this information fed to them in a way that makes them feel good, even if in the end it's deadly. And it's an old Christian philosopher that I have a lot of respect for. He's gone now, but he would say to people, um, "What good is it for me to not tell you the full truth? Why not just give you the full truth?" He says, "If I came up to you and I offered you a glass of water, and I told you to drink of it deeply and not to worry that there's only one drop of cyanide in it, would you drink of the water deeply, or would you demand a different glass of water?" And he said, "Of course, the answer is you would demand a different glass of water." And where that applies today is that no, today people would be like, only one drop? Okay. Like that's like what could possibly go wrong? And
Right.
and that's we could say what we want about it's coming up on 10:20, so you got to get up in the morning. But actually, I guess we all have to get up in the morning, whatever morning
I
it
mean,
is for
I
us.
I could give you a little more time.
But we ultimately do come to this place where we have to acknowledge that we've all been dupes to some degree or another. We've all been dupes.
Oh yeah.
For a lot of people, what we're seeing is that they've been duped by the Republican Party. Like they've been duped by the
Not
Republican
wrong.
Party. And a lot of the people in the Republican Party that have duped us are people who were firmly on our side 2 years ago, who are now shills for the insiders of the Republican Party. Like it, everybody's like, "Oh, you sound like a leftist." I'm like, "Have you listened to me? I'm not a leftist. I'm not a leftist. I'm like, I'm literally not a leftist, but I'm also not a GOPer. I'm not a normicon. Like, I'll critique Biden. I'll critique Pritzker. But I also critique Greg Abbott. I brought this up at the beginning of the show as a segue. Like Greg Abbott said that anti-Semitism is not allowed in Texas, and you will be arrested for it. Arrested for it. There's your liberty-loving Republican Party, folks, and you've been duped. You've been duped. You've got Republicans in the state of Minnesota, in the House and in the Senate, arguing for more gun control.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
the party that's supposedly been bought and paid for by the NRA, arguing for more gun control. Oh, by the way, NRA backs gun control legislation. You've been
I was gonna
duped.
say the
You've been
NRA funded
duped.
red flag legislature, so they can get clean the hell out of here. I'm not.
Right,
I'm
but
not
that's
even.
my point. But
I know
they've
people
been
that burn
duped.
their NRA stuff.
You've all been duped. Every one of us has been duped. We looked at the Republican Party and said, boy, I'm glad we got some strong Republicans. Where'd they go? I can think of one right now. I can think of one right now that stood his ground and looked at his fellows in the Senate, in the Minnesota House, or in the Minnesota Senate, and said, I'm not going to support this legislation. Any gun control legislation is an infringement on the Second Amendment. One. Some in the House co-sponsored the legislation that said
Yeah.
straw purchases should be a felony in Minnesota. And if you are hearing me say this, that straw purchase shouldn't even be a crime. It shouldn't even exist. There's no reason a phrase like that should exist. And you're thinking, you're a radical, you're the problem. It's not me, it's not Stephen, it's not the Constitutional Party, Republic Party of Minnesota. It's not, and I know there's some variances between the CRP and the Minnesota Libertarian Party, but there's a lot of places where they agree. The Libertarian Party of Minnesota and the CRP in Minnesota aren't the problem. They're not the problem. The problem are you people who continue to vote for the Democrats or the Republicans. It's insanity. What do they say? To do the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result every time and not getting it, but continuing to do it over and over and over again is the very definition of insanity. We've lost our freaking collective minds in Minnesota and across the United States. We've lost our minds. We've lost our minds. 82 years of war without a single war being declared. 82 years.
Oh yeah, that what was
Ever
that?
since Reagan,
Authorized
use of authorization of use of military force.
Yeah, the AUMF. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, that
AUMF.
thing's putting in work.
Yeah. Ever since Reagan, who gave us gun control legislation? Who to give us the Department of Education?
Right. In fairness, there's and I thought the same way quite a bit, and I do still to a great degree. But the more I participate in politics, the more I understand
You're fired.
how
You
we
better not say anything I don't like. If you say something
I mean, hey, you know, what can I say? I'm an honest man. TZ. So I gotta speak the truth, even if it should lead to my death. So
I'm just gonna drink and merch while you're talking.
That's reasonable. That's reasonable. The more I participate in politics, the more I understand how we got where we are. And I don't just mean like, well, there was these three evil things and that's the whole problem. God, I wish it was that simple. The truth is the world is run by the people who show up. And unfortunately, we have a dearth of decent people that show up. That's really, I mean, like, it isn't that simple either, but it starts there. It starts with the fact that of the available options, it ain't great. And building off of that, we'll say that the people that we do end up getting in these places quite often don't have the fortitude or the qualities that we need. They don't have the inner constitution to be disliked. I have watched repeated Marine veterans get elected to office and then fold like wet paper bags. Not because they're cowards, by the way. It's because it's a different class of courage. There's a kind of courage some folks just naturally possess that allows it sort of turns off the part of the brain that says, I don't want the group to dislike me. And even combat veterans don't always have that. Some do. In fact, I know several of them that I would never hand a microphone because I know they don't care what people think, and that's scary if you have an organization to represent. But on the same token, you know, hand them a gun and they'll get pretty much all of your problems solved if there's an enemy field to fight in.
Steven saying that they may reconsider having me MC next year's Defend the Guard rally.
You're one of the few. You're one of the few and the proud. But no, it's true though. It's a different class of courage. And when you have people leaning on you, and you know you're going to need at least a little bit of popularity because you may have a bill you want to present, and you're probably going to need more than just the people who like you to support it. It puts a different kind of pressure, and people want to build their career. But the problem we have here is you've heard of the meme about like I'm not a radical right-wing extremist. I'm just a political. That was a great event. I'm just a what the heck was it? I'm just a centrist from 15 years ago.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Because like the Overton window has moved so far that it's just leaving people behind. And I guess like the same, and that concept needs to be applied to the way that we currently view legislation. Is that there is no such thing as bipartisan support anymore. Well,
conservatives are just conservatives are just leftist driving 10 miles an hour into the speed limit. That's all. Well, we're all going the same direction.
That's a Thomas Sowell quote, right?
I don't know.
I'm almost positive he said that. Thomas Sowell's a banger, by the way. Anybody at home, if you've never read Thomas Sowell, the guy's a champion, worth reading.
Yeah, he may have said it. I don't know. I was just thinking about it one day, and I'm like, because I'm the guy that complains about like State Patrol doing 80 in a 65 and shoots video of them going 80 in a 65 and putting the video up, and then gets yelled at because I'm actually driving 65 while everybody else is doing 75. They're like, I'd pull you over for going too slow. I'm like, you freaks.
I have
I'm-
a
I'm-
I have an
so
axiom.
I'm that guy that's going 10 miles an hour slower than everyone else.
But, hey, as long as you do it in the right lane, I don't care. But no, I have an axiom for that. If you have to commit the crime to prevent or solve it, it's a bad law.
Yeah, touche, sir. Very well said. So
If
you're
speeding is wrong, then having squad cars doing 105 to stop it is probably also a bad idea. Just a theory. And while, yes, I do understand that reckless endangerment is a pretty decent law, that's not too terribly hard to enforce. And it's probably the only good traffic law, in my personal opinion. You don't have to recklessly endanger the public to prevent or prosecute that. You can just get that vehicle off the road and get the occupants off the street. It's nice and easy. If it doesn't fall under reckless endangerment in the proper definition, then it might be risky, but it's probably fine. And that's kind of it's a similar concept to things like straw purchasing and stuff like that. It's part of that lovely cocktail that the lovely verbal cocktail that the politicians like to serve us, which is if you just give me the power, I can make all of the gun violence go away. We're going to take all of the guns from these scary, peaceful people that own them and don't harm anyone. And that's going to make all the violent criminals we refuse to prosecute or put behind bars stop being violent criminals.
right. Hey, my friend
Wait,
Brentley
hold on.
from
That didn't make
over
any
on
sense. I'm sorry. Maybe I was explaining it wrong.
my friend uh, Pat Pat Dennis says for anyone watching that would like to know about more about the Constitutional Republic Party, they do have a website. You can find it. It is pretty easy to find, by the way, because it's guys like Steven and Pat need to know how to get to it. So it's got to be easy. Yeah, I
Can't
said
be
that.
that hard.
And my friend
Constitutionalrepublicparty.us.
my friend Brentley from the Disaffected. The Disaffected. Jeez, I met him because of Disaffected, but my friend Brentley from Dangerous Rhetoric is on, and Brentley and his co-host Dan are phenomenal. They are dangerous F slurs, aren't you, Brentley? You're F slurs. So he affectionately refers to everybody as an F slur. He is a dangerous F slur because of their rhetoric. But since we're talking about state patrol and people who break the law to enforce the law, I thought everybody would enjoy this.
Oh no.
This is from 5 p.m. I'm on the dash cam setting clock. I haven't updated it yet. This is Trooper Car 41180 in the Minnesota State Patrol, clearly exceeding the posted speed limit of 65 miles per hour. You could see I'm maintaining 65, and some of you'd say, well, he's probably responding to a call. He's not responding to a call. You could just tell by the way he's driving. And the fact that he's driving distracted, because when he went by, he was typing on his computer. And now watch, he does make a lane change, a lawful lane change. But watch what he does here. He swerves into the other lane because he's driving distracted. This would be enough to get all of us stopped. He's exceeding the speed limit and he's making unlawful lane changes and driving distracted. He should be ticketed for this, or at least pulled over and questioned, right?
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not
because
wrong.
having a cell phone in your hand is dangerous, life-taking behavior. But if you can get a badge and a gun from the state, you can have a full-blown laptop mounted in the middle of your car, and you can play with it while you're driving, and nobody cares. It's fine. That's perfectly acceptable, and that endangers no one. Ask no questions.
Now, I did mention earlier the Defend the Guard rally, and I was coming home from the Defend the Guard rally on March 23rd. It was a great event, folks. We are having one again next year. I have been approached by one of the organizers. and I'd be willing to, and I so graciously
Your
agreed to
video's
do
frozen.
that.
Oh no, you're
And
moving again. Okay, good.
I agreed to do it again next year, MC the event. So this
Nice.
way, Steven doesn't have to threaten to kick my ass like he did. You tell TC he's doing it, I'm going to come kick his ass. Yes, he said that. That's exactly how it was presented.
Never gonna
Hey, do you
live
want
that
to
down,
MC?
am I?
Because if you don't, Steven's going to kick your ass. So TJ Hawthorne, who's running for Minnesota House in his district, volunteered me, and Steven threatened me. So, but I'm not going to press charges because I'm not afraid. So,
Amen to that.
so this is coming home from the Minnesota Defend the Guard rally on March 23rd.
You're seeing here is a van that had been having problems maintaining lane as well as excessive speed past me. But what you're going to see now is even more egregious. This Minnesota state trooper, last Saturday on March 23rd, who was no less than maybe 2.5 minutes behind me as I traveled at the speed limit of 65 miles an hour, catches me, passes me, catches up to this van, who he should have pulled over.
And you can tell this dude is flying in this video. Can you see how fast he's coming?
Based on how he was driving, but instead rides this individual's bumper. This is an abuse of authority. This is abuse of power. This is rules for me and not for thee. And I see this everywhere. I will be posting the full video in a little while for you guys to see
That is
that this
wild.
trooper, his position as a state trooper. There was no reason for him to drive like this, and I saw him almost 20 minutes later coming back driving exactly the same way.
Oh man. I mean,
Can you see how fast?
there's one.
Could you tell how fast he was going? He was flying.
Yeah, he's doing 85 or 90. Yeah, and he's moving pretty quick.
Yeah, he was flying, and I'm like, I thought he was going to pull that van over, and no, he got on the guy's ass and rode him.
Yeah,
until the guy's like,
I've
"Oh crap,
been-
that's a trooper." Look,
Right. I mean, years ago, year like before COVID or anything like that. I think it was nighttime, and I was going through 94. Yeah, I was coming down the junction, or not the junction. I was on 94 from Minneapolis going through St. Paul, and I saw this like brown bullet coming out of nowhere, and it turns out it was state patrol. So I was like, what the hell is that? And it came by. He must have been doing like 100 miles an hour. It was hilariously fast because I was not driving the speed limit at that point in time, and he was just making me look like the pace car. Just
you were like,
absolutely
"Oh,
smoked me.
he's on me. He's gonna get me. He's gonna get
Oh,
me."
he wasn't behind me. No, he
he's
wasn't
coming
behind
the
me.
other way.
94 curves into the city, and
Oh,
and he was coming up from I don't remember the name of the stupid freeway. Why am I blanking on it? 30. Oh no, it's 35 35E 35E, where it comes. They kind of come up on you and then come this way,
Mhm.
and just swung by me so fast. And there was another one that came down, and no lights. No sirens, and not like, hey, we're on a job, we're going somewhere. Like, no, these guys are just hauling ass. Like, it was just
Yeah,
outrageous the way they were
they
flying
do
down
it
the
all the
freeway.
time. I've got
No,
video
well,
somewhere of one that flashed his lights in traffic in Rochester on Highway 52 South going towards Mayo Clinic. I'm like, okay, this guy's trying to get to the clinic or something. Nope, just flashed his lights. Cars got out of the way, and he just kept going.
oh yeah.
I
I
stayed
mean,
right
I've
behind
seen
him.
him
He
do.
wasn't going anywhere. He just didn't want cars in his way.
I've
didn't
seen him
want
do
cars in his
that
way.
just to get to a gas station, and I guess that's kind of
Yeah.
like that's the nature of power without accountability, right? Like
Yeah.
nothing's ever gonna that's fine. I mean,
Thank
here's
you.
a great example.
It's the premise of my
You know,
channel. That's the whole premise of my channel.
There's I talked to a kid and his dad the other day who this kid's like 17 RAV4 his dad just bought for him, got smoked by in the back. The kid could have been killed, honestly. It's only that like it happened to catch the trailing right corner of it that saved his life. But that it was totaled by a state patrol. Like that dude just destroyed it, and that kid walked away without a citation. He was not anywhere he wasn't supposed to be. That cop
Well,
just
that's good to hear
decided
that he didn't get a citation because normally what happens in that situation is they'll blame
right.
you and you get a
Normally,
ticket.
yeah, and normally the cop destroys your car, totals it out, you get a ticket, and it's your fault. But instead, it's just an at-fault total loss, and we're not going to charge you for this guy hitting your car.
Oh,
And it's like,
thanks.
when I mean smoked, I don't just mean like he got bonked. I mean, we're talking his lift gate, the lift gate in the back was split and peeled open. His the rear right corner, the passenger side corner of his RAV4 was inside its own storage container. I'm amazed the thing was still drivable. Like that just blew my mind. And yeah, that thing was like dead on the table. That did not survive. So like I was like, wait, so you didn't get a citation? And he's like, no. He just gave me his information. Got it, and then they dragged the squad car off. Just absolutely insane.
Mr. Chair, say hello to Madam Chair.
Hey, Rebecca, good to see you in the chat. Good to see you in the chat. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
That sounds a little threatening, but
Are you kidding me? I got an invite to the next event like that week. What are you doing in 2025? And I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm doing next month. You're the first in line. You got me.
I think I'm good. I gotta live. I gotta survive. Hopefully I'm not in a camp. Hopefully I'm not in a camp at that time. But
Fingers crossed.
I want to. Tonight's been an awful lot of talk about like inappropriate responses by people to law, like inappropriate responses in favor of law enforcement. And I get accused of being, anti-cop all the time, and I'm really not. I'm just anti-unaccountability. And I do have positive interactions with people from time to time in law enforcement. But the reason that my focus has changed, and I think, Stephen, you know this, and you know why. The reason why my focus has changed so much over the last couple of years is not just from the personal perspective of what happened to me in my career, but the fact that even though I was aware of it, it became very clear to me that tyranny is not possible without armed individuals willing to follow orders. It's not. The Supreme Court, the legislature, the executive branch, none of them have any power to do anything to you without your acquiescence and through the threat of force. And
oh yeah, for sure.
And so we have ourselves to blame for a lot of what takes place in the world. But not all of my interactions with law enforcement are bad. And I want to share this from about 2 weeks ago with you guys to see that I actually have positive interactions. And my computer's ready for bed. So, and then we'll get ready to say. Good night. At least I will, because I got to work tomorrow.
I mean, I also have to work, but yes, I have.
I don't know. Can you guys see? This is one sexy dude here, right here. This commentator. This is a sexy man. He might be related to Cletus. This guy is sexy.
I swear to God.
It's those glasses. It's the glasses. I'm telling you. He looks an awful lot like Cletus. If you guys don't know who Cletus is, you'll find out.
Following video, very, very closely. I have a story I want to tell you. I wanted to say thanks. What's your Voltman? Yeah. Sarge, appreciate it. Never know what you're going to get. Normally it's the other way around. You get told get away, and this time it was stop. So I really appreciate the way you handled it. That was. Oh, I know. I appreciate it. So
Now that you watched that video, that Officer Woltman just ran into him at a local convenience store. He walked up to me, remembered me, shook my hand, and when I told him I sent the video to his chief, he said, "Yeah, I know." He told me, "Good job." Folks, when we run into decent cops when we're doing an audit, we have to let them know. Encourage them to continue.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've met several incredibly good cops, and in fact, I routinely have very good experiences with cops. It seems like some of us are just kind of, no, I'm not going to pet you the whole time. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Yeah, no.
He looks like my
I
Calvin. He
I
does. He looks just like my Calvin. I'll show you.
oh, the but no, it's really crazy. There's some of us that just have like a crazy like bad cop dowsing rod that just you find them and find them and find them. I've only run into a couple that I was like, how are you a cop? Like, explain this to me, please. Use whatever small words you're capable of. But like, I just, the vast majority of cops I run into are really good dudes who I don't believe in a million years would, I guess we'll say, knowingly execute some pretty tyrannical stuff. I mean, they'll probably do the usual thing and they're usually nicer about it. And I've watched them be more decent. Say, listen, there's a lot of things that, I could sit here and cite you for, but I'm not going to. This is what I'm after. It's a good thing that I'm after, and there's nothing wrong with it. So I'm going to go after that. The rest of the stuff, whatever, I'm not interested in that. And those are some of the best cops you'll ever find. I have met FBI agents who are that good, which is impressive because we're all of the opinion that the FBI is just a crazy Illuminati factory of crazy tie
No,
wearing
I
yes
just
men.
think no, I just
But,
good guys or not, it just needs to be disbanded. But that's just
no, I mean, hey, like, and I'm not
agency
defending
that
like
should exist.
right. I'm not defending the whatever the bureau has become, of course. But like the bottom line is like there are truly good people that serve in these things, and I genuinely believe that those people will be valuable in the future. That being said, the there's an ongoing, and this is something that actually a friend of mine who served in the Air Force. He's also a member of the party. He took intelligence and counterintelligence courses with his GI Bill, and in the classes that they had, they discussed something very interesting to me, which was, well, it was all interesting, but like this was very intriguing, which was they found people were starting to ask themselves, well, wait a minute, I think we might be the bad guys. I'm joking. They never asked that question. That'd be reasonable. No, but they were asking themselves like, how is it we keep having these like crazy like domestic intelligence failures? How does this keep happening, right? Which I'm sure there are plenty of people who are like, yeah, I don't know. They know, but like in large numbers, because the CIA and the FBI almost directly serve politicians because they run our country. And so the more corrupt politicians get, the less interested they are in genuine, real life-saving, American life-saving intelligence, and the more they're interested in, well, ambition. And so that's caused this hilarious sort of dysgenics to co-opt that term in intelligence gathering and the usage of that intelligence, because the intelligence that does actually save lives never makes it to any of these people, because they'll straight up tell their liaisons to these agencies, I don't care about that. Yes, I know the violent communists are organizing. Yes, I know they have weapons, and yes, I know they want to kill people. We don't care. Like they just straight up, like they'll just be like, nope, we're not, because they'll take the intelligence they get and they'll form them into packets that they then send to the committee that they report to, and that committee is usually largely made up of incredibly corrupt politicians that have very, very personal interests and ends, and they don't really care what happens to the average American citizen. That just doesn't, they don't give a shit about that, flat out.
You mean
And
Thomas
so
Massey?
right. So these agents don't actually, like, the good ones don't get their data to the people that theoretically would need it, because those people don't want it. They just straight up don't
Yeah.
care. And so a
Oh,
lot of,
speaking of Thomas Massey, if you guys haven't heard, the Sergeant of Arms of the House is trying to charge him $500.
yeah, charge him $500. I read that. Come on.
might even be per day that he doesn't take down the video of the traitors in the House of Representatives waving treasonous traitors waving the flag of Ukraine in the
Get
House
your
chamber.
filthy foreign flags out of my federal people's chamber.
They want to charge him at least 500, maybe 500 a day. I personally, I'm poor as hell. I will pay one of those. I will pay.
I'll pay one instance of no, right, but like seriously.
I would like, not that Thomas Massey needs me to pay it for him, but like but it's the principle. It's just the freaking principle. Hey,
Here's your next $1 million idea. Open a Give Send Go for people willing to donate to Thomas Massey's charges for making sure the American public can see the outrageously blatant foreign influence in our people's house, the biggest people's house in this country, and I guarantee you that thing will stay full.
The only thing that was missing was the flag of Israel. I mean, it's just, and that's next. I mean, they've done it. They've done it, but that's coming. It's coming next. So, I mean, Zionist Ukraine, right here in the United States of United States of Zionist Ukraine. But hey, you go get out of here. I'm going to say my thank yous and goodbyes, and then I'm going to go make myself a little bit of something to snack on before I head off to La La Land. So,
Roger that.
Stephen, it has been an honor and a privilege, and it's been fun having you in my my sphere since we connected 4 years ago. 4 years ago, and you got merch. You got merch. Your mother-in-law bought you merch.
Neither of us are in a camp yet either.
That's what you think.
I was going to say the camp gets bigger and harder to discern the more money they get, in fairness, but
we are already in an open air prison. Like, we just are. Like, it's just like we are. Like, let's be honest, we are in an open air prison. And speaking of open air prisons, I have solved the border crisis, by the way. I've solved it. You want me to tell you what it is? you want me to tell you what it is? Okay. We're going to rename northern Mexico Gaza, and we're going to ask the IDF for help.
I mean, the funding would be unlimited, in fairness. I mean, like, you just never see the bottom of that bank account. It would be so
Tell me
full.
I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong.
You know, that's damn near illegal at this point, just because it's so rare.
Right? Oh.
It's terrifying.
Tell your other half hello and thank you for sharing you with me. Yes.
We do have merch. It's a fantastic T-shirt. It's crass and vulgar, but so are the times. And the beginning of wisdom is to call a thing by its proper name.
I will grant you. Thank you for saying that. I didn't have to. It is hilarious. You go get out of here, and I'm going to say my goodbyes and thank yous before I get tired and emotional. And thank you for your kind words earlier.
I'd serve on a field with you anytime.
Likewise. Four years, folks. 4 years. Where the hell are they? I don't know where they went. I can't. Oh, here it is. 4 years. Four years. 4 years ago, I was doing this. Four years ago today, I started this channel. 4 years ago today, I went up and I started doing man on the street interviews. I had no idea where this was going. I didn't know what it was going to become. I was a damn good deputy. If I may say so myself, I was one of the good ones. Different capacity. I wasn't on the streets, but I was dealing with people inside of a detention center. And I learned a lot about human nature, and I learned a lot about the nature of law enforcement as an institution, the institution of policing. And I learned that tyranny is only possible because people with badges and guns are willing to enforce unlawful, unconstitutional edicts. People with badges and guns are willing to strip you of your natural rights to remain comfortable and well paid. Do I hate them? I don't. My brother is in law enforcement, has been for over 20 years. He would die for the people he serves. But a lot of people, including family members, will not talk to me anymore. A lot of fellow Christians have turned their back on me because they think I'm crass and I'm evil and I don't honor the government. And they're right, I don't. I don't honor the state. I hate the state. I hate that the state has the power to strip us of our natural rights. And I hate the fact that most people are willing to let them do it. I hate the fact that the vast majority of people in the United States applaud the erosion of our natural rights through the hands of the state, through the threat of force of people with badges and guns. They applaud it. Some people are on the left, some people on the con right, the normie cons. They're all tyrants because they want the power of the state to inflict pain on people they disagree with. And they're vying to have the power to be able to inflict that pain. I've always hated that. And that's what this channel has always been about. And like anything, when I started, I was far from perfect, far from polished, and far from professional. And I'm still not perfect, and I'm still far from professional, and I'm far from polished. But I stand on my convictions. While a lot of you who may watch this and hate it sat passively by and did everything that you were told to do in 2020 and thought you could vote your way out of this, thought that somehow you were going to make a difference because you would just vote for the lesser of two evils, you're full of shit. Well, all of you were doing that. I was actually doing something. I was doing something. For those of you that hate what I say, for those of you that think that I'm some sort of weird radical because I stand up to law enforcement and I stand up to the state, the city state, the county state, the state state, and the federal state, because of that, you think that I'm the radical. I did something. What did you do? When my friend Lisa Hanson went to prison, it wasn't because of anything that I didn't do, and it wasn't because of anything that I did. It was despite the fact that I was trying. Was trying. But I'm one small voice in a sea of loud, obnoxious sports ball lovers who would rather be entertained by bread and circuses than to stand up and fight for their natural rights. People like Bo Bish from Flex Your Freedoms went to jail because a tyrant cop didn't like having his feelings hurt when he got called a tyrant, and he threw him in jail. And in a criminally corrupt justice system in Blackhawk County, Iowa, saw fit to throw them away. And for those of you that are watching, this isn't applying to you unless you're one of the haters or one of the FBI agents or BCA agents deciding to watch me. Somewhat tongue in cheek. But where were you? What did you do? Well, you're hating on me. Well, you're calling me a radical and you're thinking I'm anti-cop and all of this stuff. What did you do? You did the same thing that you've always done. You complied to just comply. And you have no one to blame but yourselves. You don't get to blame Biden if you're a Biden hater. You don't get to blame Trump if you're a Trump hater. You don't get to blame the cops if you hate cops. You don't get to blame the social workers if you hate social workers but love the cops. You did this, not me. I didn't lose my career because of anything that I did wrong. I lost my career because people like you, the haters, and the compliant sheep remained silent while everyone else stood to fight for you. So you can hate on me all you want, but I'm not the problem. And I will continue to fight for you, whether you ever appreciate it or not. I stand on the shoulders of giants. The Jeffersons and the Washingtons, the Ethan Allens. We all stand on their shoulders. It's just some of you deserve to be trampled under their feet. Quote the poet, "Rage, rage against the dying of the light." If you haven't done so yet, head over to my Subscribe Star, pick a support level. And more than anything, make sure that your friends subscribe to the channel. Tell them to send me a super thank you if they're watching this on playback. Share this out. And for those of you that have been with me since you met me and those that have been with me from day one, I can't thank you enough. Can't thank you for standing with me and standing alongside of me. I can't thank you enough for supporting me in whatever ways that you have. And for those of you that have become friends through all of this, who become brothers through all of this, I cannot ever repay. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not stopping. I'm just going to get more active. Monica, one of my subscribers, one of my friends, watcher, made this for me months ago. Handmade this. Fight for your liberty. It is yours. Fight for your freedom. It belongs to you. And until next time, Sic Semper, Tyrannus.
We are going for liftoff in T-30. Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. Secondary guidance systems engaged. Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark. Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at